Call this workshop to order. And before we get started, this board workshop is being live streamed for the convenience of the public at www.okaloosaschools.com. A separate seating area has been set aside for the press and public who are in attendance at the meeting in accordance with social distancing guidelines as provided by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. In accordance with the governor's executive order, school board members are allowed to participate via telephone. At this particular meeting, the Honorable Dewey Destin, the Honorable Tim Bryant, the Honorable Marcus Chambers are in attendance, and the Honorable Dr. White, Lamar White, Dr. Diane Kelly, and the Honorable Miss Linda Vanchek are present via telephone. So with that being said, I apologize that we're starting late. We did have some technical difficulties with computers and phone lines. So to the general public, that's why we are starting a little bit later than what was scheduled. So we'll move on down the line here and we'll go to approval of agenda. Item 2.1 will be changes to agenda and approval of agenda. And we have nothing in recognitions, visitors, and administrative personnel appointments. Public comment. Members of the public desiring to address the school board, Form MIS 5241, public input and or discussion of agenda items. And Section 7, committee and staff reports. 7.1, in-county travel paid for the period of June 5th through June 24th, 2020. And item 7.2, out-of-county travel paid for the period of June 5th through June 24th, 2020. And we'll move on down to the consent agenda. And before we get started, board members, stop me at any time, but as always, I have instructed the superintendent to get with all staff members who have items on the agenda to try to reach out to you beforehand. But if there's any questions or comments that you would like to make, just please interrupt me at any time. So we're going to go down to 8.1, approval of the consent agenda. 8.2, approval of the minutes of the workshop meeting of June 18th, 2020, minutes of the regular meeting of June 22nd, 2020. Item 8.3, appropriation of District 1 School Board member capital outlay funds to Meigs Middle School for classroom flooring in the amount of $16,984.08, presented by Dr. Lamar White. 8.4, appropriation of District 5 School Board member capital outlay funds to Richburg School for recreation classroom flooring in the amount of $6,930.24, presented by Dr. Diane Kelly. And because that is a school I represent, Dr. Kelly, thank you very much for supporting Richburg School. 8.5, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of revised School Board Policy 04-28, Emergency Operations, School Safety, and Security, presented by Danny Dean. And Mr. Horton, would you please come to the podium, please? Mr. Horton's going to give just an update on this particular board policy.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And Danny Dean does a great job, and he's on an assignment in Crestview at the moment, but he does a great job in keeping up with the statutes and statutory requirements for updating our safety and security policies, and works with Mr. McGinnis on a regular basis to update those. And so I think Mr. McGinnis will share with you that these are some requirements that are been highlighted in statute that we need to make sure we put into our own policies.
Okay.
Yes, sir. These are updates to this emergency operations school safety policy. These are areas that are within the safety and security review that is done by the state for us. And if you'll note under section C1, we simply have added a reference to pandemics as part of what the emergency operations plan will cover in the future. And if you look down then under section C8, this is a requirement now that although the practice is current that all employees wear their identification badges, this will put that into board policy that all of our district employees will visibly wear their badge while they're on property and facilities as part of a safety and security practice. Item 9 is just confirming that campuses are open to the public, but in accordance with other school board policies and rules. And all visitors that come to those properties have to check in at the main office and follow all of the district procedures for visitors. That needed to be codified into policy. We go down to Section D on student safety. You'll see item 4 is just a update on the responsibility of school guardians and their response to active assailant incidents. You have other policies in place, and the Sheriff's Department has general orders in place for that process. Also, item 5 there is a confirming in policy a requirement that school personnel report any and all mental health or substance abuse crisis situations to the principal, who will then direct that as appropriate to either the school's mental health counselor or the school resource officer. Subsection E deals with school lockdowns, and this is simply just adding a additional reporting standard that if there's a lockdown, the practice now is that it gets called into school Office of School Safety. This just puts that into your policy from that standpoint of reporting. And we go down to subsection K, which is zero tolerance for crime and victimization, which of course is required to be in policy by statute. And we have a new subsection 3, which actually ties into some amendments that we're going to propose to you to your zero tolerance discipline policy. This is just confirming that although under the statute, petty acts of misconduct do not always have to be reported to law enforcement by the principal, the threat assessment team will, however, involve law enforcement if there is a series of these acts or multiple events of that conduct by a student. And then the last item there under that section is a codifying once again into policy the current practice of personnel reporting incidents which pose a threat to school safety and other crimes, and it puts in effect in writing the school principal's duties in to notify other appropriate parties. And Mr. Bryant, I believe with that, and the final change here is just by policy confirming that the school safety specialist will be our district emergency management coordinator.
Okay. Any questions or comments? I'll start with Mr. Destin.
I did have, the last one is the only one I had a question about, designating the school safety officer as the emergency operations center commander. Who's done that? Who had that job in the past?
But our district, Danny developed our district emergency operation plan, so in his role there, I am the person who oversees that all, but I have the ability to designate him to do, to take on tasks involved with the operations center, which is located at Carver Hill.
Okay, now here's my question. We've added a number of items to the list that are emergencies that would be managed. Pandemics, hurricanes, I'm not sure all of those are in the area that he has expertise. I know that I've dealt with emergency management at the county and municipal level. It's a pretty specialized position. Mr. Dean is extremely busy doing what he's doing. I'm not sure I feel comfortable making him the emergency operations manager to pile on top of what he's doing already. And what is the qualifications for somebody who holds that position?
Yes, sir. I'll review that with him today,
you
and we
would.
may come back with an adjustment to that
Thanks.
if needed.
And I take it that is not a statutory requirement?
Well, I think that this is in direct response to the state's review. They wanted to see in policy a designation of an emergency management coordinator.
Yes, sir, but it's not specifically said that it would be the person.
I think it was just a matter of the board by
Yeah.
policy having one who
And
designated that.
as Mr. Horton said in the past, you were the person or you designated somebody. I just don't want to put a job on top of Mr. Dean that he's already overloaded.
Understood, and it came with his recommendation. So in terms of experience, he's had far more training than any individual in the district to take on that responsibility. So he does emergency operations training regularly. And so if we need to look at a title or position there, I know that he's going to stay integrally involved in those operations. He's involved in the shelter operation as well because there's safety involved in
Yeah.
that. So what he does obviously starts with student safety and employee safety in the school district. So we'll take a look at that and see if there's a another way to do that.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Ms. Ivanchek?
Well, I understand what Mr. Destin is saying, but I'm also reading that, of course, whatever the situation, Mr. Dean or whomever would consult with the local authorities on that specialty. So if it's a fire, obviously with the departments and everything. But I just want to thank Mr. Dean and whoever all worked with him on this, because I think it's very comprehensive, and I appreciate that they went back and even added into, with the pandemic and everything. So thank you for that. That's all.
Okay. Dr. Kelly?
Yes, I just believe that from my understanding and my conversations with Mr. Dean and maybe even with Mr. Horton previously, is that these changes were by and large to bring our policies in alignment with the new state statutes and with the new state guidelines. So I very much appreciate knowing that our policies have been upgraded to that standard. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. White?
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. And the same thing, I spoke with Mr. Dean, and certainly I think that these statutory changes are in order, and I appreciate all of his work and staff's work in putting this together. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just have one quick question regarding Section K, number 3. What would be determined petty acts?
And Mr. Chairman, when we get into the discussion on policy 04-33, that's one of the places we have put a definition into that policy for that. It even in that policy, it is an umbrella type definition, but you also will consider that under 04-33, we have very specific definitions of those things that are zero tolerance. And so when you combine that with the description of what would be a petty act, that's what we would operate under.
All right, thank you. All right. Anything else, Mr. Horton?
No, sir, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move down to item 8.6, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of revised school board policy 04-33, violent crimes, possession or use of tobacco products, alcoholic beverages, drugs, weapons, or firearms. And Mr. Humphrey is in the audience, if you would please, Mr. Humphrey. And we'll go to 8.7, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of revised school board policy 04-32, discipline. So, Mr. Humphrey.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might just lay some groundwork for Mr. Humphrey. 04-33 is, once again, these are revisions that are implementing some statutory matters. I would let you know that in regard to the new section defining petty acts of misconduct and how those are handled by a school principal, this topic is already included in the interlocal agreement that the board has had with the Sheriff's Department for a number of years. So this is not a new topic. This is just codifying in policy that provision. You do have a written agreement with the Sheriff's Department that's been in place probably for some 5 to 7 years. When this very first came out in the statutes, that was all put in place back at that time. In regard, I would say, to policy 04-32, just so you know, that is just a cleanup amendment to that policy because of changes to 04-33. We changed some section numbers, and that's the only changes in 32 is just conforming that policy to this new change here.
All right. Mr. Humphrey.
Okay. So recently, Mr. McGinnis and I sat down, we reviewed 4-33 and changed or added language to it that put us more in line with the statutory requirements. And in reviewing that, we spotted language that may needed to be tweaked. So we went through 4-33 and brought it more in line with the statutory requirements.
Yes, sir. These were, you'll see, for instance, under Section A, which is the zero tolerance, tied into some of the changes that we just looked at in the school safety and threat assessment policy. We have added a statement here about the role of school resource officers in handling reported incidents. That was something that needed to be codified in your policy. And obviously, they operate under the procedures and general orders of the sheriff, and so that's why that's what's been included in your policy, that will define their role. You see under the list of zero tolerance offenses, There has been an update there that now includes sports officials in the category of assault or aggravated assault, and also in battery or aggravated battery. By statute, they have been included among the list of individuals that if in fact that happens to them, it elevates the level of the crime, in some cases to even a felony. And so they have been added in here because that's relevant to a school setting where we have so many sports officials that are working through our athletic programs. Also, the other change here was to bring into the policy a specific reference to weapons of mass destruction and destructive devices. That's been included. And also, you'll note that by Florida law now, there is a minimum mandatory 1-year expulsion for a student found guilty of making a threat or a false report of an explosive or destructive device or a weapon of mass destruction. The policy has always had a minimum mandatory 1-year expulsion for gun possession, and that was under the Federal Gun-Free Schools Act. The state has implemented a similar 1-year minimum mandatory for these type of serious zero-tolerance threats, and so that's why that's been included there. You see under Part B is where we have included the definition of petty acts of misconduct, provided school principals with standards that they can use when they consider those situations and determine whether or not they think it is a threat to school safety, which would then cause them to report to the SRO, or if it's a matter that can appropriately be handled with discipline. The point of the legislature when they implemented this a number of years ago was they were attempting to reduce the number of criminal records, if you will, that students were gaining because all kinds of conduct was just automatically being reported to law enforcement. So the legislature required that school districts look at this issue and set a level of conduct that would not necessarily require the child to be reported to law enforcement, which would get them into that system. And that's what this does here. And understanding, however, that simply means that the school principal does not have to direct that to law enforcement. If a parent of a student who was somehow a victim of something chooses to report to law enforcement, they certainly can do that. This does not control their ability to do that, nor does it interfere with the sheriff department or other law enforcement carrying out their own responsibilities if something is brought to their attention independently. They obviously have to follow their own rules and procedures. The other changes board members you'll see are just strictly minor word cleanups, and in the back under section G, clarification, we did roll in a weapons definition out of chapter 790, just once again making the policy, we think, better and even better for use out in the field by our school principals.
Okay. Mr. Destin, any comments?
No questions on this?
Okay. Ms. Saviacek, any questions or comments?
Well, just as an observation, it's although I know it's necessary, it's certainly disconcerting to this board member to have to read a policy that mentions weapons of mass destruction. But so is the times of our world, I assume. That's all. Thank you.
Dr. Kelly.
None, thank you.
Okay. Dr. White?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Humphrey. Okay, so we'll move down to item 8.8, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of revised School Board Policy 04-49, school threat assessment teams. Mr. Horton, would you like to address that?
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. And again, I think Mr. McGinnis and Danny Dean worked together to incorporate those pieces that were required to be added this year based on statute. I will report to the board that the threat assessment document that is adopted by the state, we received approval in the spring to use an online secure resource to help make it easier for schools to conduct threat assessments and to be able to look at and analyze data. When the COVID-19 school closings came, we didn't get to implement that, but we'll be prepared to go at the beginning of the school year with the state-required threat assessment document in an online secure format.
Mr. Destin, any questions or
No
comments?
question on that one.
Ms. Vancheck, any questions or comments for Mr. Horton?
No, thank you.
Dr. Kelly?
No, thank you.
Dr. White?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Horton. Okay, so now we'll move to item 8.9, authorization to advertise the proposed preliminary and tentative budget and millage rate for fiscal year 2020 through 2021, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon. Okay. 8.10, budget amendment number 9, fiscal year 2019 through 2020. 8.11, monthly financial statement for May 2020. 8.12, school donations. 8.13, invoices to be approved for payment. 8.14, letter of engagement between the School Board of Okaloosa County and Carr, Riggs, and Ingram LLC to audit school internal funds for year ended June 30th, 2020. 8.15, emergency purchase train. 8.16, ITB 20-18, emergency bid for equipment replacement repair services for Baker Sewer Plant. Something I learned the other day. I didn't know we had a sewer plant at the Baker School. So, 8.17, renewal of tag-on annual purchase agreement for indefinite quantity environmental contracting services, presented by Vince Wyndham. 8.18, renewal of tag-on bid, RFP 190806, speech language pathologist, school psychologist, occupational therapist, and physical therapist services. 8.19, tag-on bid over $25,000, Career Staff Unlimited, Community Rehab Associates Incorporated, Jackson Therapy Partners LLC, Maxim Health Services, and Solient Health. 8.20, tag-on bid purchase over $25,000, WTI. 8.21, tag-on bid purchase over $25,000, Polar King. 8.22, exempted purchase over $25,000, Sunbelt Staffing Solutions. 8.23, exempted purchase over $25,000, Frontline Education. 8.24, exempted purchase over $25,000, Cognia Incorporated. 8.25, service agreement number 21-17, Jamie Fields. 8.26, service agreement number 21-22, Ashley Johnson.
I have a comment on these items.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Vancheck.
Okay, thank you. I see we have a list, quite a list here of agreements for individuals who provide services to the school, band, choreography, and those kinds of things. And what we're looking to approve this or not approve this for a new school year, can you just remind me and to the public, these individuals, with all our safety requirements and everything, they're all required to follow the same rules as far as they would have a badge and everything to come onto the campus. Is that correct?
Mr. McGinnis is going to answer your question.
Yes, Ms. Vancheck, the service agreement document that we use requires all of these individuals to go through the same fingerprint background process that we have in place for employees if they're going to have direct contact with students, and most of these persons supporting the band and other school operations do. So they are fingerprinted, and I think a part of the fingerprinting is where the badge comes into play. They have to follow all other safety requirements, and I would also tell you that under these service agreements, when they are contracted to work directly with students, by contract we require that a full-time faculty member or employee of the school be present with them when they are working with the students. So they are not given, by contract, not given just direct lone supervision of students.
Okay, thank you. And then financially, for the public who may be looking at this, all we're really doing is, as the district, is serving as a conduit because we're not paying them. It's the school group that actually pays them, correct?
Ms. Scallon is making her way to the microphone.
Yes, ma'am. All of these service agreements are funded through internal funds, which are from the various clubs and organizations within the school that are funding these enhancements to the program.
Okay, I just want to make that clear as we're starting a new year that this is not something we put in our budget, but that it comes from the individual schools. So thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Bryant.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ms. Ivanchek. Great question. So we'll move on down. 8.27, service agreement number 21-23, Connor Adams. 8.28, service agreement number 21-24, Jamie Fields. 8.29, service agreement number 21-25, Grow Your Gift Services, LLC. 8.30, service agreement number 21-26, Johari Harris. 8.31, service agreement number 21-27, Joshua Went. 8.32, service agreement number 21-28, Kenneth Rhodes. 8.33, service agreement number 21-29, Michael Hoppenjan. I hope I pronounced that right. 8.34, service agreement number 24-34, Kristen Elder. 8.35, service agreement number 21-35, Julie Henderson. 8.36, service agreement number 21-36, Christy Woodard. And 8.37, surplus and disposal of outdated AED automated external defibrillator, presented by Steve Bolton. 8.38, sale and disposal of surplus property. 8.39, contract lease renewal agreement and second amendment to contract C08-1671-LIB between Okaloosa County and Okaloosa County School Board for Library Cooperative Courier Services. 8.40, modification to contract between the School Board of Okaloosa County and Avena Healthcare. 8.41, exempted purchase, Avena Healthcare. 8.42, memorandum of understanding between the School Board of Okaloosa County and North Florida Medical Centers Incorporated. 8.43, cooperative agreement between School Board of Okaloosa County and the Early Learning Coalition of the Emerald Coast for Child Care Services provided to the Teenage Parent Program. 8.44, contract between the School Board of Okaloosa County and the Northwest Florida Ballet Incorporated for 2020 through 2021 school year. 8.45, workforce education rapid credentialing grant application. 8.46, Carl D. Perkins post-secondary entitlement grant for fiscal year 2020 through 2021. 8.47, elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund under the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security CARES Act project application for 2020 through 2021. 8.48, GER Summer Recovery Award project application for 2020 through 2021. 8.49, Title IV, Part A, Florida Department of Education project application for 2020 through 2021. 8.50, Title I, Part A, Florida Department of Education project application for 2020 through 2021. 8.51, Title IX, Part A, Florida Department of Education project application for 2020 through 2021. And 8.52, course adoption for the 2020-2021 school year. And now we'll move down to Superintendent's Human Resource Recommendations. 9.1 and 9.2 will be informational only on Monday night. So 9.1, employees on administrative leave, and 9.2, deferred retirement option program drop. 9.3, cleared certification requirements and issuance of contracts for the 2020-2021 school year. 9.4, employment separations. 9.5, personnel recommendations. 9.6, employee transfers. 9.7, reinstatement reimbursement of sick leave due to line of duty illness, injury, medical examination. And finally, 9.8, leave without pay. Section 10 will be discussion agenda. If there's any items moved from the consent agenda. So now we're moving down to construction program owners representative business and 11.1, Mr. Destin, I'll let you take over.
Thank you, Chairman. As you see, 11.2 has to do with the stadium at Crestview, and Mr. Horton, you want to come up and give a brief synopsis of that?
Yes, Mr. Bryant, we learned last week about some repairs that were needed to Jack Foster Stadium as a result of an inspection by an engineering company using a bucket lift truck. And so the stadium, we've got a letter from the engineer verifying the stadium is still safe to occupy, but for some top rows on both the home and visitor sides. And so we're in the process of erecting some fencing as we did at Choctaw for those so that the graduation ceremony can continue as planned next week. And then we'll begin developing some cost estimates. And this particular board item is a time and materials similar to what we did with Choctawhatchee Stadium, or Etheridge Stadium at Choctaw, that we'd want to be able to get started on that as soon as possible.
Okay.
And that covers it. We're going to proceed like we did at Choctaw to try to do what we can do within a certain budget, and then we'll have to come back and see what else we have to do. And the fencing, we're going to assure you won't be green as it was at Choctaw. Dr. Smith said he'd make it black or red, so it'll come out all right.
There you go.
Wait, once a dog, always a dog, so
Yes,
there
sir.
you go. All right. Ms. Ivanchek, any questions or comments regarding this particular project?
Well, just in general on stadiums, so, now this is the second high school stadium that we've had concerns about and need to do repairs. So where are we in the big picture of evaluating all our stadiums?
Yes, ma'am. We're required by law to do an evaluation of all of our stadiums and bleachers and gymnasiums every 2 years. Recall last year when the Etheridge Stadium situation arose, we came back to the board and the superintendent recommended that we do the large stadiums annually. And so Jack Foster Stadium and Etheridge Stadium are the two large concrete structures above ground. Of course, Niceville's kind of sitting in a bowl, so it's a different set of dynamics there. And Fort Walton Beach with the bleacher system is different. But we are reviewing those stadiums annually, and then all others in accordance with the law, and that is every 2 years. And then once we do that,
We have a total of 5 stadiums, right?
Yes, ma'am. So the Baker Stadium as well, and that's on the home side is still, I think, a little bit different kind of a structure, but we do look at that annually. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Dr. Kelly?
I think I'm good right now, but
Okay.
I do agree that the closer observation of these stadiums has led us to a greater understanding of the aging process of these facilities, and I'm very grateful that we're being proactive as we look at them more deeply and we see in more depth what's needed, that we do have some plans in place, so thank you for that.
And Dr. White?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Bryant. Just to say the same thing, that certainly appreciate the school districts being proactive in this matter and catching this situation at Crestview High School early and giving us a chance to correct that and have that repaired and avoiding something that might have been potentially catastrophic. So good job on that, school district. And I'd also just point out, and I know everyone's aware of this, but the public might not, that when we inspect stadiums, we also inspect school bleachers in gymnasiums. Is that correct, Mr. Horton?
That is correct, Dr. White. Yes, sir.
And I think that's important for the public to know because, as all of us know, when those basketball games are going and the stands are full in those gymnasiums, that those bleachers have also been inspected for safety. But thank you, Chairman Bryant.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Dr. White. And I would agree with those basketball stadiums. If you've ever been into Choctaw Stadium when it is rocking, it's rocking. So, all right. So we'll move down to 11.2, and that's program number 6, task order number 9, time and materials task order, emergency remedial efforts, both design and construction for repairs to Jack Foster Stadium at Crestview High School. And
That's the one we just discussed, so.
Yes.
We're moving forward with that.
yes. And I believe that would be something we would be voting on Monday night. Yes.
It is.
Yeah, okay, so let's move down to section 12. We have nothing there. Mr. McGinnis.
No report today.
Okay. I've just relayed to the superintendent, he's got a nice presentation that he's going to give here in just a minute regarding reopening schools safely. So I asked him if we could kind of just go with school board members moment first, and then school board members, when Mr. Chambers does his business, of course, you're free to jump in and ask any questions or make any comments. So we're going to start with Mr. Destin with school board.
The only question I had was to ask for this very document, so
Okay.
Superintendent has provided it to us. I look forward to hearing his presentation and reviewing it, and if any other questions, I'll ask him
All
on
right,
Monday.
all right. Dr. White, anything that you would like to mention as a board member?
No, but I'll certainly reserve comments for the superintendent's presentation.
All right. Dr. Kelly?
Yes, I just wanted to remind folks that www.bringhope.now. We're still going on with the Lip Sync for Hope project that benefits funding for the school's Hope Squad Club. Say that 4 times quickly. And then an appreciation, of course, as always, to our donors for, at this time, generous donations to Lewis Middle School, Fort Walton Beach, and Elliott Point. And also, we really didn't stop on this item, but just to give kudos to Kelly Hayes and the rapid credentialing project that she's undertaking. I understand that districts were not given any real amount of turnaround time to get that project into the state. And so I think that will be great for our district to help students get into the workforce very quickly, particularly in the highly sought after fields of technology support and cybersecurity. And that's all I have.
Okay. Ms. Ivanchek?
Yes, is Lieutenant Venuti in there?
He sure is. He's actually sitting over there in the corner being good.
Okay, this is about him.
Okay.
I think most of you know that Lieutenant Venuti just received the Lifetime Achievement Award for his work with our SRO program. And I'm glad that I got to bring this out because Lieutenant Venuti and I go way back when he was an SRO at Choctaw. And on a personal note, I got the distinct pleasure of teaching his son in my journalism program at Choctaw, and one of the best young sports writers I ever had. And so I want to congratulate Lieutenant Venuti and thank him for his dedication to the students in our school district with his program. He came to my class on several occasions through the years and told his story of growing up and some of the challenges he had as a teenager. And I truly believe that his testament and his work with young people changed a lot of young lives. So congratulations, Gary, and thank you so much.
He waves at you. And hopefully Paul
thank
Paul
you.
has him on TV right now. So, anything else, Ms. Ivanchek?
Good. One question, I know we got summer school started, correct? Is Mr. Chambers going to bring that out when he has his time?
Yes, ma'am. I believe that was part of his presentation, giving us a trial run on what we look forward to on August 11th. So.
Okay, thank you. Then I'm
All right,
good. Thank
all
you
right.
so much.
And my only comment is I'm so excited about next week, Mr. Chambers. Of course, like Ms. Ivanchek just brought up about summer school, we have opened up the schools to summer school, trying to get some type of, I hate to say the word, but it's the word we're using right now is normalcy to try to get normal operations back in. But I'm really excited about next week because we're going to be doing the graduation ceremonies. And for me, I know I'm really excited about just for the kids and their parents and being able to, here it is about a month and a half after the last day of school, and we've done everything we can to make it as exciting for them as we can, but nothing beats actually coming up on stage and getting the diploma. And I know, Mr. Chambers, it's going to be something special for you. You have one graduating this year, and I'm just excited because all the schools are going to have these ceremonies, and I just know, looking down on, looking into these faces as they come up on stage, you just see the smiles. And virtual graduations are, it's great that we did this, but actually getting their diploma, being on stage and having their families out in the audience is going to be exciting. So I'm really happy that we're moving forward with those graduations and look forward to, well, I know I'll get to go to at least 5 of them. So, and I'm sure my fellow school board members, if they so choose, will visit 1 or 2 themselves. So now we'll just move it over to Mr. Chambers, and you're up, sir.
All right. First of all, I appreciate it. Before we get into the reopening schools plan, I do want to also address some of what Ms. Ivanchek was talking about as well, which I appreciate her comments because they're right on point. But first, I want to start with also recognizing Jerry Hooks, the SRO at Choctaw as well, who was the SRO of the year. And when you think about Okaloosa, and Lieutenant Venuti's in here, Okaloosa at least has had, I believe, 3 SROs of the year. And you think about 67 districts, and I think this year was back-to-back, I believe. So Okaloosa, to have back-to-back SROs of the year, plus other winners as well, when there's 67 districts, it is just a testament to the SRO program that Sheriff Larry Ashley's put in place, that Lieutenant Venuti has, and I use this word lovingly, he's almost been the godfather of the SRO program over the last 2 decades. So congratulations to Jerry Hooks, SRO of the year. That is a huge accomplishment, and I know that we're all very proud of him. And then I also want to piggyback on what Ms. Ivanchek said. So the Lifetime Achievement Award that Lieutenant Venuti received, I can think back to my first year of teaching. Lieutenant Venuti and I, we started together, in essence, in the school district. And SROs are individuals that provide safety to our students and our employees, but they do so much more. And Lieutenant Venuti is a true testament to that. Not only is he a sheriff's office employee and a valued member there, but he's a valued member of the Okaloosa County School District family. What he has done at all the schools that he's been at is he's created relationships not only with the students, but the employees. And he's done that delicate balance of keeping himself as an officer, but also being a part of the school system. He is someone that we have gone to time and time again for advice, for help, and whether that's 4 months out and he helps us, or whether it's, oh my gosh, we need your help right now, he has been there for us every step of the way. This resource officer program that we have would not be where it is today without the work of Lieutenant Venuti. So I know all of us couldn't thank him more. And when he does decide to retire, which is coming up, he will be sorely missed. But because of the work that he's done as leaders do, they lay a foundation so people can go forward. So we just thank you, Lieutenant Venuti. And if you don't mind, just for a second, if you just want to come forward and just maybe even say a couple words.
So, anybody that knows me knows I'm not good with this kind of thing. So I give credit where credit's due. You surround yourself with great people and great things happen. So I've been blessed to work in the school district and for the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office for the last, I'm going on 30 years with the Sheriff's Office. But I remember my first day in schools, and what you can say is, I bought into the process and what we need to do to help our students and staff, and I'm just glad to be a part of it. I'm just glad that, we made that decision so many years ago to allow police officers in school, and I hope I've done a good job.
And you have.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And I would just comment, just with everything that's going on out in the world today, we are very fortunate to have role models such as Gary Venuti and his team of SROs. I mean, they're literally role models in our schools. And that, to me, is important. That's policing at its best right there, when you can be a positive role model to these students that are coming up through the school district, and they can look to a SRO for guidance, friendship, whatever. And that's what true policing is all about, is being an influence on those kids at an early age and being mentors to them and helping them take the right path and helping them graduate. That's our goal, is to graduate them and get them into the world. So.
All right, thank you, sir. I did want to also just briefly touch on graduation. As you know, that'll start next Tuesday. I think there's a lot of groundwork that has occurred over the last several months to get to where we are today. A lot of communication has occurred to get to where we are today and to be prepared for next week. We've had several meetings also with principals to be prepared. So the graduations that you see will look differently this year. You'll see kids that are social distance out on the football field. So where they're normally maybe in a more condensed fashion, it'll spread out across the football field. You'll see families, households that will be in pods, so to speak, and then the social distancing amongst the stadiums. You will see when they arrive, schools have reached out to families to say, hey, you're parking in this area and you're coming through this section, so that we don't have families that are coming into one section. We had a great meeting with Lieutenant Venuti with the Sheriff's Department to make sure that we're prepared to have the number of SROs on hand, to make sure that we're prepared for the traffic flow as well. You'll see a more expedited graduation this year, not to rush, but you'll see a more expedited graduation. You won't see a lot of the hand shaking or hugs necessarily, but you will see a transfer of that diploma, so to speak. Some of the stages look differently because some of the ways that the students got down before, and we kind of take their hand, help guide them down. So some of the stages will look differently as well. We want to make sure, because we know it's hot, that we've encouraged families to bring water, but there will also be a water bottle for families as well. Just want to make sure that we're looking out for the hydration piece. We have extra stadium bleachers that are coming in to make sure that we can help space families out as well. So another precaution that has been put into place, so normally at the end of a graduation, you'll see the graduation hats. As you know, we turn the tassel, and those graduation hats go up in the air. So that won't happen this year, unfortunately. The end of the graduation will be the commencement song will come back on. The kids will march out, and that's all in an effort to make sure that we don't have congregating that happens on the football field. So we do not want that to happen. So the students will march back out. They already have their diplomas, so they would then go to their cars. Families would then be by section. By section, we'll release families to go out to their cars, so we don't have a lot of bottlenecking. Couldn't thank the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Department enough for being a part of this process, because it's a big deal. We need their help to do this. And I can't thank the principals. We also did a virtual graduation as well across several days, and that was our insurance policy in case we couldn't be here today in terms of next week. So the principals have put a whole lot of time and effort into really celebrating, and deservedly so, celebrating our seniors. As you know, we've done a lot on social media as well in terms of celebrating our seniors. So next week is the culmination of what many students and their families have been waiting for since they started preschool, and that's to graduate high school and graduate and be honored. And that's what we plan to do with a whole lot of safety precautions in place. So that's graduation. Summer school, just briefly, summer school started this past Tuesday, and that's part of the GEARS Act money. We're just very thankful for the teachers that have stepped up to be a part of this process. As you know, we transport students on the bus. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure is some of what we're about to go through today with the safety plan is also being implemented during summer school. And I think, Mr. Bryant, you kind of used the word trial run earlier. So what I've asked our staff to do also was to go out this week to each of the schools and see how intake was occurring, make sure that we're touching base with the principals. How's the instruction going? What does the social distancing look like? Right now, from what has been shared with me, the students coming off the bus, they have their masks on, and you'll hear about that when we get into the presentation. So students are wearing their masks on the bus. The vast majority of students who are arriving at school have that as well. And then, of course, then there's the instruction piece to our business of what we do, which is about educating students. This is a K-3 model that we're utilizing, and this is all a part of the governor's initiative, the Department of Education's initiative in order to close the achievement gap. As you might remember, we already had started summer school, but we started summer school virtually. And then I believe, and the date's in the presentation, but off the top of the head, I believe it's June 12th, we got notification that we were going to have face-to-face summer school. So Mrs. Lightbourne and her department excitedly started the communication and getting with our principals, getting with teachers, and then communicating with families in terms of making sure that we fit the requirements of the GEARS money. So a lot of work, effort, energy, expedient nature of things have occurred to get to where we are. So I very much appreciate Ms. Lightbourne and her department, our principals and the teachers, and of course our families who are coming in and taking part of summer school. So that was a quick update on graduation, on summer school, and if there's no questions or comments, then I'll go into the reopening plan.
Mr. Dest?
I do have a question, please.
Go ahead, Ms. Ivanchek.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chambers, on graduation, I don't, sometimes it's hard for me to hear everything, but did you talk about tickets or limiting the number of guests for students? Is that based on the school they're at and the space?
Thank you, Ms. Vanchek. I neglected to say that. The four, what we sometimes refer to as the four big high schools, they will have 4 tickets apiece. As you might remember at the very beginning, we were looking at 2 tickets apiece. We ended up increasing it to 4. There are some who would have liked for us to go to 6 or 8 or even 10, but where we are, didn't think that was necessarily appropriate right now. We also looked at the capacity sizes of the stadiums and tried to also let that be a part of the factor as well. Some of our smaller schools, such as Baker, in terms of smaller at the high school level, they're able to have 8 tickets just due to the nature that their stadium size and the total population will still be less than some of the 4 larger high schools.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted that clarification. And then back on summer school, this is indirect to summer school, but I just wanted to ask about how we're doing in getting devices turned back in. I know we were allowing them to have a little bit later into June if they wanted to finish, but do we have a report yet on how we're doing on getting our devices back in?
I can make sure we have that available at the next board meeting, but we are working with the principals and through remote means by sending notices out on the devices to have them turned back in. You're right, Ms. Ivanchek, we've allowed some of the folks who are doing the summer school program, so for example, secondary kids who are doing credit recovery with a device, we told them they could keep that device through the summer school program, and so those are still out there as well. It is important that we get all of those back, and so Schools will be following up with phone calls, and we will be tracking those down to make sure they are returned. But I will bring you an update at the next
thank
board
you.
meeting as to what's still out there.
Chairman Bryan, I have a follow-up.
Okay, so Dr. Kelly, I'll let Dr. Kelly go first, and then Dr. White, you.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So with regard to summer school, most of you recognize that I have been very guarded myself with getting out and about. I do have a family member that may be health compromised, so I'm very cautious. But yesterday, I did tiptoe out completely masked up to a couple of our schools and took a peek into summer school. And I just wanted to brag a little bit about those principals. Before I was allowed in, of course, everyone knows me, but I did have on my badge. I had my temperature checked. Everyone was social distancing. We all had on our masks. The students were appropriately distanced. They were doing their own thing. They were on task, on target. The teachers were masked. So I was just very impressed. As you said, in some ways, summer school can be maybe a trial run for how the real opening of school, August the 11th, might be. And I would just say to those principals who are hosting summer school, they're doing a phenomenal job, and I thank them for those efforts. I know it was very difficult, certainly on short notice, as has already been indicated. So just thank you to our principals and our staff out there for making summer school work.
All right,
Thank you, Dr. Kelly.
Dr. White?
Yes, sir. And Dr. Kelly, thank you for that good report. And I might have missed it, Superintendent Chambers, but I know in the past when we had the capability and so forth with technology and folks to assist and so forth, did we say or do we know if the graduation services or commencements are going to be live streamed?
Yes, sir, they will be.
All right, thank you.
And if I might, I neglected to ask a question at the end of that. Could I get a clarification for some of our staff who have asked me about masks, and some of our parents who have called me specifically to ask about clarification with student masks? I know in the handouts and the emails that I've seen, it says requested masks, but will masks be required of our students and staff, and to what extent will that be maybe monitored or followed up on? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. And as I go through the reopening plan, we will address that specifically.
In terms of the graduations
I
ceremony?
apologize. In terms of the graduations, it is strongly recommended. It is not required.
Now, the outdoor ones, that's,
But in the fall, it will be addressed more clearly.
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to go through that specifically.
yeah, I want to congratulate you on all of
Thank
it.
you.
We have made all the major big graduations outside in the stadiums, which is a good thing. I noticed we have a couple of the middle school that are in auditoriums. Are we requiring masks indoors?
So right now, there's no requirement of masks. Once again, I'm strongly recommended, but we will have masks on site at the graduation for every adult that shows up and for every student as well. So a mask will be provided, but strongly recommended.
And there was no way to accommodate those middle schools outside?
And I'm not sure what you mean by middle schools.
Or you're talking about Richburg
Richburg,
and Silver
right.
Sands?
So we spoke with, so for example, Laurel Hill. Mr. Horton, you can help me in terms of the bleachers and such. But we still made sure, for example, like with Laurel Hill, limiting the number of people in there so they could be social distance, but you may have a little bit
And
more
I think the
information.
same case too. I know for example that Fort Beach High School reached out to Silver Sands to maybe have their graduation there. I think the principal, in looking at the layout of the school, was able to determine that it could be accomplished inside in the air conditioning with social distancing, and I think there will likely be a lot of masks worn there.
Okay, well, we sort of need to encourage
Yes, sir.
indoor.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
And I know looking at Silver Sands in the past, it's, their auditorium is small, but the the amount of people that actually attends is a very small amount. So I think it can be achieved even in that small of a space where Mr. Destin's concerns about social distancing, and I'm sure people are going to do the right thing, and if, we'll provide the mask if they don't have one, and put it on.
No, absolutely, and especially as it pertains to Silver Sands and Richburg, as you know, even outside from speaking, even some of the heat elements, and in terms of some of our more fragile students as well. So it's definitely a delicate balance.
Yep. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
All right, Mr. Chambers, let's
All right.
get to the heart of the meeting here.
So, first of all, I just want to say, as you know, as you go through a process such as this in terms of reopening schools, and I think you said it very well, Mr. Destin, I think it was 1917, somewhere in that area, is the last time that we had something of this magnitude. So the overwhelming majority of us across all 67 school districts across this nation really haven't experienced something like we're experiencing right now. And the thing that I'm extremely proud of is because, at least here at Okaloosa County, we have people who are stepping up from our teachers, our support staff, our principals, and our district staff have worked diligently, have worked extremely hard to get to where we are today. And you'll see in a second that this is a process. And we wanted to make sure that we brought this to you but before we finalize it and before we send it out. I appreciate those of you on the board who have already reached out to me and some of our staff who have also offered suggestions, which we've incorporated as well. So I thank you very much there. So board members that on the phone, you were emailed the PowerPoint, so hopefully you have that there in front of you. And of course, board members here, you have the PowerPoint plus a hard copy in front of you as well. So we're going to go through it. And some of the acknowledgments that we wanted to make just right from the beginning in this plan are a few. And we understand that the reopening process to schools this fall is part of a process. And in that process, we want to make sure that that we were collaborating with our parents, with our employees, with our staff, with the community, because everybody wants to know what will school look like when we go back. And also part of that process was summer activities. And as you know, in our summer activities, we've taken a phased approach in terms of getting at full capacity in terms of athletics and athletic events. So this is a process. Secondly, within the acknowledgement is we want to make sure we do things twofold. One, we want to make sure that we open schools safely, and that's with the input of a lot, and you'll see those individuals that were part of this input. But we also want to make sure that we do what we are all here for, which is educating students at the same time. And in that educating students, there's now another piece is we have to make sure that we also close that achievement gap. And the closing the achievement gap is something that started also this summer. Like we just talked about a second ago, we started summer school in June. We started that virtually. We also have the GEARS summer school, which is geared towards closing the achievement gap. And then we also created for elementary and middle school a GAP program that any student, regardless of whether they might be a struggling student or whether they might be a high-flying student, that there are activities that they can take part in to also close that achievement gap. And I'm very proud of the fact that we created that document. Also an acknowledgement is we understand that there's no one size fits all for reopening schools, which means it's important to provide our families options. And you'll see some of those options today. Also, we understand that our plans are fluid. As you know, where we are today on July 9th is different than where we were on June 9th. And where we'll be on August 9th is different and hopefully better than where we are today on July 9th. So this is an ever-changing dynamic. I think 2 months ago, I think the research and the expertise was that where we are today, the numbers would be down. And as you know, The numbers have gone up. And that's something that we have been in constant communication with the health department. I will say that Dr. Chapman has been excellent. There's not one time that I've called her that she hasn't answered, whether that's at 6:30 or whether that's at 8 at night. She has been great, and we've made sure that we've partnered with her, whether it was summer activities, whether it was graduation, whether it was summer school, and of course this reopening schools document. Also part of the acknowledgement that I get a lot of questions on, I'm sure you do as well, is what will athletics look like? What will band look like? And one of the things that I say is the NFL, the NBA, the Major League Baseball, these are multi-billion-dollar organizations, and they do not necessarily know exactly what their season's going to look like. College football, multi-billion-dollar operation, they do not know exactly what their season's going to look like. Right now, we are pushing forward to have athletics to start the school year, but as you know, as we get more information, we'll be able to make a more informed choice. However, we have met with our athletic directors, making sure that they're a part of the process, getting their concerns, also getting their guidance as well. So, for example, July 27th, I believe, is when football, for example, can start their official practices with pads. So we are working through a process with our schools to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of getting to that date. But also there's volleyball coming up in the fall, there's cross country coming up in the fall, and there's swimming coming up in the fall. So all of these we're working through our athletic directors. We also have meetings that are set up where we're meeting with band directors, we're meeting with choral directors. Those are two areas where say droplets could occur. So we want to make sure that we also get the guidance and the expertise of those individuals as we say, hey, what will band look like? What will chorus look like as we go into this upcoming school year? So those are just a few of the acknowledgments. Want you to understand some of the process that we've gone through. So first of all, we started off early where we surveyed our parents, we surveyed teachers, which gave us some good information. Then in June, even though as senior staff and talking with principals, we'd already started talking about what will schools look like, but in June we started a work group, and that work group is comprised of teachers. It's comprised of teachers at different levels. It's comprised of union members, both on the teacher side and the educational support side. It was comprised of principals, and it was also comprised of district staff. And they broke into subgroups to hit topics such as what will instruction look like in the school building? What will instruction look like online? What will transportation look like? What will the cafeteria look like? What will locker halls look like? What type of protective gear do we need? What would cleaning look like? So a lot of subgroups and a lot of meetings and a lot of individuals, especially on the teacher side and the educational support side, have given up their summers to make sure that we do the best possible job to have a safe opening to schools. We also have been, like I shared, in ongoing consultation with the health department, specifically Dr. Chapman. She's been phenomenal. We've had principal group meetings as well, because we have a number of principals who are on the work group, but we still wanted to make sure that we heard from all principals. So we also included them as part of the process. We, this week, I believe it was this week, seems like a long week, we also met with our SAC chairs. These meetings, the vast majority of these meetings have been done through Zoom. Our SAC chairs or SAC representatives were able to provide us with some input and some questions as well, which we appreciate. And then we also met with a group of community members to bring a lot of these recommendations and then what this reopening schools plan looks like to our community so they could also give input. We had members from each of our 4 chambers. We had the resource officer or from the sheriff's office representation. We have invited some of the medical community. Some parents were also on that committee as well. So we wanted to make sure it was a well-rounded group on the community side to give us information. And then we also have some teacher meetings some additional teacher meetings that are set up for this Friday and set up for Monday in order to get even more input. So we have gone through an exhaustive process to ensure that we get input as we go forward. And I think today is also important, as we go through this, the way that this has kind of worked well is if you have a question, you might want to jot that question down, and then towards the end, we'll answer all those questions. And then any questions that we might not get, if it's based on time, you can get those to us, and then we'll be able to look at those. And what we have is a frequently asked question document that has been put together, and it kind of takes you from getting on a school bus or getting out of your car throughout the day. So it's kind of chronological, and then everything in between, a frequently asked question document that's also a part of this reopening schools plan.
Mr. Chambers, if I can real quick, before we move forward, I just personally would like to say, thank you moving forward to this, through this process that you're getting ready to go over. But I wanted to go back to acknowledgement, and one thing that I want people to understand what we're talking about today is that there's one topic down, or one bullet point there that says no one solution will meet everyone's needs. And I think that's important, and very important for us to discuss today, that Mr. Chambers and his staff and we as a board, we know not everyone's going to see it eye to eye, but I do appreciate the fact that we're coming today with this information to at least give a direction that we're going with the school openings. And like you said, what today is July 9th, tomorrow, July 10th, something could change. But I just, before we got started, I wanted to say thank you for everybody that's gone this far to get where we are today. But I just wanted to point out that one bullet point there, that we understand that we're not going to make everybody happy, but at least we're showing a direction we're going. So, and that had community involvement, parent involvement, teacher involvement. There's not just one person making a decision here. So,
Absolutely, and I appreciate that, Mr. Bryant. And one form of communication I actually left off is, as I've shared with you prior, is our superintendents, Leon County, Bay County, Walton County, Santa Rosa County, Escambia County. We've also discussed reopening schools and getting ideas from each other as well. And that's been beneficial because we do want to know and have an understanding of what our surrounding districts are doing as well. So some of the guidance that we've really looked at in terms of formulating this plan, as you know, the governor and the Department of Education back on June 12th, they put out their reopening schools plan. And it was about a 120-page document that had a lot of excellent suggestions, things to think about, not necessarily mandates, but things to think about. So we took that into consideration. As you know, the CDC has been a prime resource for all entities, so we've looked at those as well. But considerations for schools, childcare, cleaning, disinfecting, and so forth, that document is a wealth of information. We've also utilized the Florida Department of Health, specifically here in Okaloosa County. So our health department, Dr. Chapman, like I've already said, she's been instrumental. But parent surveys, employee surveys, we currently have another employee survey that's out right now. It'll be in on Friday. So we wanted to, because things have changed here in Okaloosa County, we wanted to go back out and survey again. But then we also had internal work groups like we talked about, school advisory councils, community partners, and then of course what happened the other day is the Commissioner of Education, he issued an emergency order, EO06, which was this July. And that, which we appreciate that guidance, but it also caused us to also make some tweaks on July 6th going forward. So a lot of information has come into creating this plan that we'll be going into.
Mr. Chambers, I have Mr. McGinnis, I have a question regarding the Commissioner of Education's emergency order. Now, that's coming from the Commissioner of Education. I mean, how does that, does that actually make us, short of that being a governor's order? I mean, that's just guidance, or is that basically saying we're going to, through the governor, we're going to have to open schools
I mean, the Commissioner of Education exercises overall authority over the public school system in the state of Florida, and in his order, he recites various rules and other statutes that he has the emergency authority to waive or to interpret. He's done that.
Right.
His order also, though, references any and all governor's executive orders, and certainly his order has to be not in conflict with anything the governor puts in an executive order. So he, in his emergency order, he implements anything that's in the governor's orders. There's authorities there that give him some of this ability to do this, but just by the fact of his position and the authority he has, he's acted to issue this order and to cite the state board rules and other statutes he's acting under.
Okay. And the reason why I brought that up is just to clarify to people who might be watching this at this time that, you know, we are following directives from the governor, from the Department of Education. So go ahead, Mr.
Absolutely.
Chambers.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Bryant. So on this next
I have a
slide.
question, too, if I might.
Go ahead, Dr. Kelly.
Okay. Yes, regarding the surveys, I do appreciate and value the surveys that we're sending out. And I just wonder if there will be a time when the results of those surveys would be made public. For instance, I'm very interested in those from the parent and teacher perspective about how our online learning went.
Yes, ma'am. It's been a long summer, but you may recall that at the beginning of the summer, we brought those survey results back to the school board and shared them with you. So they're part of the school board record in terms of the parent responses to those. And I can't remember the exact board meeting.
Did we get specific comments, though, rather than just overall numbers?
Yes, ma'am. I can pull the specific comments. It's a large file and provide those to board members if they'd like. And so I'd be happy to do that following this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Horton.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Anything else? Okay, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you.
So we're moving to the part of the plan that deals kind of with the timeline. And just as and you guys have been a part of the timeline, so I won't go as in depth, but as you know, back in March, when we were leaving to go to spring break, and I've used this as I've talked to people, some of us were maybe planning to go into different vacation spots. Some of us were going to stay at home and relax. Some people may have been going to Cabo San Lucas. And instead, we realized that schools were going to be shut down for a time period. And in that time period, as you know, we got an online curriculum in place. We fed kids. We got almost 10,000 devices out to families, and that was due to the hard work of our employees. So then we get into April, and we realize that schools are going to be closed for the remainder of the year. So we continued with the online learning. We continued and extended our meal program. And then we got into June, where we started surveying parents and teachers. We started our reopening schools work group, and then we also started summer activities. And we started summer activities in a phased approach. Currently in summer activities, we are in phase 1.5. Then the CARES Act came out. As you know, we submitted our plan for the CARES Act, the GEARS Act, and then we move into July, where we are getting towards the time where we will finalize our reopening schools plan, continuing with some more surveys, getting those results. Our GEARS summer school is in full operation right now, and we're continuing our feeding. And then, of course, we'll move towards August, where we will open on August 11th, and you'll see there'll be different options, and that's when also we will put all of our safety measures into place to open schools as safely as possible.
So, Mr. Chambers, you are saying we are going to open August 11th?
Absolutely. I think as you as we'll get to here in a second, it's been mandated that we
Right.
reopen schools in the fall.
And I know a lot of what I've been being asked by parents is, is it definite? So it is definite now. We are moving.
And I say definite in terms of it's July 9th.
Right.
And with the emergency
definite
order
today.
that has come out, as well as the governor, his expectations as well, that schools reopen, we will be prepared to do so. Now, just once again, it's July 9th, but we're
Right.
going forward with, we're reopening schools.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Then we started looking at what is Okaloosa's theory of action, for example. So once again, and it kind of goes with what Mr. Bryant was just saying. So we know that we got the executive order that mandates that all schools and governor boards that we're going to reopen school 5 days a week for students. But then we have to make sure within this theory of action that we're opening schools as safely as possible for our students and our employees. Also, we understand that face-to-face instruction, there are some who can work really well in an online virtual dynamic, but I think the majority of us believe that a face-to-face instructor, that there's no substitute for that. So we know for many students and families, the face-to-face is necessary. But also, we also understand that achievement gaps, like I shared earlier, we have to make sure that we're doing a good job, not only for some of our struggling learners, not only for our students with disabilities, not only for our ELL learners, but also for some of our high flyers who may have regressed in some areas. Then we have to look at our local economy, which is part of our theory of action. I think it's important from feedback that I've received that families are able to get back to work. I think it's important for their households and also important just for our local economy. So we are one piece, the school district, I think a big piece to this economy, but not at the sacrifice of the safety of our students or employees, which is why you'll see several measures that are in place. And then also our theory of action is, we're taking a step-by-step approach, and we started that this summer with athletics and extracurricular activities, but you'll also see even a step-by-step approach in reopening schools, and you'll see a number of measures of what will happen in a school day.
Mr. Superintendent, may I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Kelly.
I certainly appreciate and understand that this is such a moving target that, it's hard to plan for days in advance, even much less weeks in advance, when we don't know what's happening health-wise in the county or across the state, but we're concerned about Okaloosa County, and I appreciate that you're keeping in close contact with Dr. Chapman. But my question is something that hasn't been addressed, and maybe it hasn't been addressed with the superintendents either, but are you getting a feel from the state that perhaps the mandate for schools to open and to be open 5 days a week might be tied to funding or FTE generation, or do you think that mandate for 5 days a week is somehow going to filter down to dollars for Okaloosa?
I think that there's a possibility, and Dr. White, which is a great, Dr. Kelly, which is a great question, and I think you're going to see on the next slides, I think slides 8 through 11 off the top of my head is going to go specifically more into that, but I think the quick answer to that is yes.
Okay, I have not previewed your slides, so I did not know that, but thank you.
No problem at all. I just want to just make sure that we cover this as extensively as we can, so excellent question. Then looking at some of the indicators for success, once again, I think it is paramount, I think from the board's perspective, it's paramount from my perspective, and I think our entire Okaloosa County School District family, that we open schools safely for our students, their families, for our employees, for this community. It's important for us to instill confidence in our families, and some of that's going to come through the continued communication that we've done in the past and the communication that we'll do going forward, and then the communication which is paramount once the school year starts. We also have to look at not only the academic side, the safety side, but the social and emotional side, which you'll see some of that will happen obviously at the start of the school year. And the social emotional side for students who have been out is a real thing, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of that as well. Also, we have to elevate our educators and equip them for success. So part of that is the professional development, such as looking for symptoms of COVID, understanding that, what do we do? So there's going to be a professional development side to that will occur during pre-planning, but some of that's also going to be occurring throughout the summer, where we will be sending out information to our teachers for them to look at their leisure, but it's going to help them become even more knowledgeable in this new environment. And then you have enabling our parents, once again, to get back to work, which I think is part of the success. And then, of course, in all of this, we have to continue to show compassion and grace as we go forward. Even families that choose the online model, where we can say it's a choice, it's still not necessarily a choice because we're in a new environment. So what families choose to do, I think, is critical, and it's critical that they have the options to make those choices. So these next few slides, I'm going to have Mr. Horton come up and talk about a little bit of this, this emergency order, how it impacts maybe some of our options, how it impacts some of our funding as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. So, board members, as you know, with Mr. Chambers outlined, we've been working on this plan now for over a month and a half. This emergency order came out on July 6th, and what it did was it put some requirements on districts that had not, up to that point, been there, but we had been contemplating. Nonetheless, it is going to cause us to do a little bit more work to ensure that the district can receive all of the funding for student enrollment that it can possibly receive. And so what happened was that the Department of Education is requiring districts, there's two options basically. A district can open their school buildings, and if they have a traditional virtual model, like our Okaloosa Online, those two concepts could roll forward for the new year, and district would not have to submit any plan to the state of Florida. Now, the issue with that is that schools are funded based on two methods. One is student seat time. So think about a student in the 7th grade sitting through all 6 of their middle school courses and being in those, because we have the bell schedules to address that, so that by the end of the semester, that student has had enough minutes of seat time to be funded through what's called the FEFP program, through a full-time equivalent funding. So we would receive funding for that student. Now, it's not likely in Okaloosa County, but if that student wasn't able to pass 3 of their classes in the brick and mortar building, the district still would receive funding for that student, because the teacher still had to be in place, the lights still had to be on, the buses still had to run to pick that student up. And so the funding, the understanding is the funding is based on the student being in the building and in the class. The other model that's out there, that's been out there for a long time, is a virtual model for districts that pays on completion. And so in a perfect world, if a student is successful in all of their coursework, then you're eligible to collect funding for that student in arrears once you report those completions. And so that's, in a nutshell, the 2 different models for how students can be funded. There's other weighting factors for special groups of students and things like that, but that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. So when we have an environment now where a percentage of our families want to stay home because they're not quite comfortable bringing their children back to school, there's real concern about moving to a completion-only model of funding. And if you have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 families choosing to do that, and all you have to offer for them is a completion funding model, then the district runs the risk of losing or not receiving a significant amount of funding to cover the costs that we know are going to be incurred this fall. And we've been very careful about hiring positions. We've done that judiciously. Our enrollment right now, in terms of numbers of students enrolled in our schools, is fairly solid. It's actually about 400 students higher than it was last year at this time. Nonetheless, as we see families select an online option, and we have one we're providing to them, we want to make sure it's an option that we can produce a plan for the state that they will approve, that will allow us to collect funding for these students as though they were sitting in our chairs and our desks in school. So they'll be at home, but the model that needs to be approved is one that allows us to collect that level of funding, if that makes sense. And so what these 3 slides do are kind of provide some of the information for that, but it says in that first slide, in order to receive reporting flexibility, so that's what the state's calling it, the ability to report students who are not in a building in a seat, to report those students for the regular FTE funding, we would have to submit and get an approval of a reopening plan. And so I'll tell you today that some of the components of that plan, some of the fleshing out of it, and some of the things that the Department of Education will want to see since this came out on Monday are not in this plan today. Because I think the superintendent wanted to bring you this information that had been worked on so that you could see a lot of the things that people are asking questions about. We will have that model, but we'll have to make sure the design of it meets the Department of Education specifications for that. Now, what they're going to be looking at in these reopening plans is the percentage of students who are projected to learn live through synchronous or asynchronous instruction. And so let's talk about that for just a minute. 2 big words. They obviously mean opposites of each other, or at some level opposites, I think. The word synchronous means if I'm a 7th grade student at home, I have a schedule of 6 periods that I am literally connecting to a classroom at the school at that exact time that class is occurring.
Mr. Horton, I
Yes.
hate to interrupt you, but we have to adjourn for probably about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Recess. Thank you, Mr. We're recessed. Before we get started, Mr. Horton will go back to where we think we might have dropped y'all. And then after that, we're going to recess this meeting and go into our workshop meeting, and then recess that and go back into the presentation. So, Mr. Horton, when you get to a point where you can stop, I'll kind of give you a cue that. So go ahead, Mr. Horton.
Yes, sir. And I think if we just dropped off toward the end, I was talking about asynchronous versus synchronous education and learning and explaining what that was. And it just is part of one of the factors that FDOE is going to be considering in their approval of these plans. The other is proposed.
And I do have a question
Yes,
about
ma'am.
that, if I might.
Go ahead, Dr. Kelly.
Yes, for Mr. Horton, I do appreciate and I remember how seat time and FTE are generated by traditional classrooms and by the virtual model. I know that some colleagues in other districts are also using a separate online model which allows students to view from home their regular traditional classroom setting and have support in that manner. Are we looking at something like that for those students who might want to and the families who might want to still keep up with their traditional classroom courses, but do that from home?
So, and I'll answer that, Dr. Kelly. So first of all, great question and great point. So to date, that was not one of the models that we were looking at. It is something that we had discussed in the past. Now, of course, once July 6th got here, and we're looking at the models that we have, which we've actually tweaked our own My School Online model as well that we'll be submitting to the state. But particularly what you're talking about, so we have discussed that. Now, I will say, just being very, very transparent with it. So let's just, so we know that we have 1,800 teachers, so to speak, and we know that that we want to be as judicious as we can, obviously, with our taxpayer dollars, with the dollars that we get funded, but also in this COVID environment, we want to make sure that we do right by our employees as well, and make sure that we have slots for teachers, for employers, ed support professionals, but not just to have a slot, because we want to be responsible with dollars. So we know that there's a number of teachers right now that also want to go online. Some of them are 65, some of them are health compromised, and some of them just simply want to go online right now with this format. The program that Dr. Kelly's referring to and some districts are looking into is a good model, but let's just say that there's 22 kids in my math class and now 5 kids in that course want to go do the model that we've talked about where we Zoom from class, they can stream in. Another 5 kids in another class, another 5 kids in another class, where those kids could have gone to the teachers who are 65 or health compromised or want to teach online because of this environment. Those kids would no longer go to those teachers. So one of the balancing acts that we're looking at right now is how do we match up students with our teachers, but still being responsible with the dollars that we have and being responsible with the staffing that we have. So, Dr. Kelly, that is a model that we're looking at.
Thank you for that response. I know that there are some districts who did that last year, so maybe we could benefit from their model and their experience.
Thank you.
Okay. So at this time, I am going to recess the board workshop, and I'm going to call the special budget workshop into order, and I'm going to recess that, and I'm going to go back to calling our budget workshop, our regular scheduled workshop back into order. So, Mr. Horton?
Yes, sir. Moving on to the next slide, it identifies the framework for these, what the state's calling innovative learning environments. So that online piece that is in response to the COVID situation. And again, the format that they're looking for is live synchronous or asynchronous education. The ability to interact with teachers and peers. So if I'm at home, they're going to look to do I have the ability to connect with a teacher regularly, live, real time, one of our Okaloosa teachers. And then also peers through Zoom or chat groups or something. So those are important components that will be in Okaloosa's plan, and I think Mr. Chambers will speak to that at some point down the road here. The content, their framework says same curriculum and instructional hours, whether in person or at home. We've got to address, so that's a statement to be read, but it's important. Now notice they say live synchronous or asynchronous education. So the asynchronous piece is you're not necessarily linked up with a class in the school building at all times, but there is a documentation of time for instructional hours that's going to have to be met. And when the state put this out this week, there have been, I think, came out Monday, they did a webinar Tuesday, they did another webinar Wednesday. I think as questions keep coming in from districts regarding this. And as I mentioned, I think districts in our area, many of them have elected, at least initially, to go with the in-school building model and the traditional virtual school model. And it's that middle piece that we're trying to create and be authors of. And Dr. Kelly is correct that it's being tried in some other districts around the state. That's the piece that we believe will help us, help our kids, but also help us to retain funding that we believe we'll need for the school year. There's a big focus on equity for all types of learners. So again, we'll have ESE students, ELL students, struggling students who might choose to be online. And so we've got to have mechanisms in place to make sure that those students are attended to. And then a big focus on narrowing achievement gaps has been on the governor's plate since the beginning of this process.
That was going to be a question I had. Thank you, Steve. I wanted to ask about how IDA would be supported across the banner or across the continuum of our ESE students, and how we would monitor for that in these very strange and unusual times.
They are strange and unusual. I think some of what we did in the spring will be improved upon, but I think Dr. Willis-Doxey and Ms. Lightbourne will have a strong plan in place. I know that in the spring we did some virtual speech language sessions with kids, social work sessions with kids, mental health counselor sessions. So a lot of those pieces that are in place will still be in place. And I do think it's possible in a model like this to, if the parent is of a mind in limited situations, have a student come to a campus for certain services that they may not be able to receive at home if it's part of a plan for that student in certain environments, but maybe not in the whole population of school. The other piece on this in terms of progress is maintaining automated attendance records by day and hours of instruction. Have a system for monitoring daily engagements in every class, conducting progress monitoring, and providing all these results of progress monitoring to the Department of Education. So no small undertaking. I think what's happening right now is there are a lot of plans in development and being sent over to Tallahassee to take a look at. And so I think that the real issues will be when the rubber hits the road and making all of these things happen, because the words on the page are one thing, but making them happen is the critical piece. I do want to mention that there was a list of assurances that the Department of Education is requiring of districts in order to be able to have this kind of a plan approved. The first assurance, I don't have them on a slide, but just speaking to the original statement about opening schools, the first assurance to be able to have an innovative learning environment is that school buildings will be open 5 days a week. So that is the first requirement and assurance in order to be able to get approval for this kind of innovative learning environment model where we're doing a hybrid online from home piece, and that's important. And then this last slide here, and I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Chambers, school boards and school governing boards, charter schools with an approved reopening plan are authorized to report approved innovative learning students for full FTE credit. And so what that means is if the Department of Education approves what we're wanting to do, then they will let us report those students in that program for full FTE credit.
And do they audit that? At some point.
And I hate to keep interrupting, but
Hold on, Dr. Kelly. Hold on, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Destin has asked Steve a question.
Okay.
I was just asking, I know that they audit the other side, and I'm sure they will get around to auditing this.
absolutely would be the case. And our regular FTE audit process, I think, is every 2 years. So it is not out of the realm of thought that they would audit this program. And if it's not done with fidelity and according to the plan, they could seek back FTE just like they have in other times for other reasons. Yes, sir.
Okay, Dr. Kelly?
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question. I really appreciate the points about synchronous versus asynchronous learning. And for those students who are virtually learning, are we progress monitoring? Are we addressing that in our plan? Are we map testing? Are we providing the same types or different types of assessing for those students? And is that in our plan? Does the state require us to have that in such a plan?
They will, yes, ma'am, and those components are going to be added. As I said, we've just got the webinar information Tuesday and Wednesday, and Ms. Lightbourne's here.
Dr. Kelly, in our ESSER plan, we also added iReady for K through 8. It is going to be used to close the gap for all students. So our students who are high achieving as well as our struggling students will all be using iReady. It will be our progress monitoring tool that we will submit to DOE, as well as an instructional tool that will help fill those gaps in for our students.
And I appreciate that. And just for those listening in at home, an explanation that what we're seeing live streamed is a minute or two ahead of our audio when we ask a question. So if we seem disjointed, that is why. Thank you, Ms. Whiteboard.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly.
All right. So as we move forward, now we're going to move more into the options. So we talked earlier, and we know, I think as a school board, as a school district, that providing options for our family during this time is critical. So you'll see here is the traditional model. So that's where our students will be coming back to the school 5 days a week, and there'll be some changes which we'll go through as we go through this process. And then there will be what we call My School Online, which allows a student to stay tied to their school. It allows them to get emails. It allows them to stay a part of that school. But on this My School Online, that'll be different from the last 9 weeks. There's a number of things, and you'll see on the next slide, we'll show some of the comparisons between the fourth 9 weeks and this new model. But one of the pieces I do want to highlight, just even right here, the daily teacher interaction. So there will be daily teacher interaction, which I think is very important. And there will be remediation teacher interaction as well. There also will be student-to-student interaction in the My School Online through methods such as Zoom or through methods such as Teams. So that is important. Now what's not on here is actually, there is an option number 3 as well, which would just be our normal Okaloosa Online. So families who still would like to do that, they absolutely have the ability to do so. And of course, we'll be communicating that with families. Going to the next slide, going more specifically into the curriculum aspects of this. So if you remember, the last 9 weeks on the elementary side, we did not have Accelerate as our curriculum house, so to speak. So Accelerate will be the program that we'll be using for elementary. It has all of the 4 core classes of ELA, Math, Social Studies, and Science. The last 9 weeks, we didn't have that ability, so the teachers worked through that. Accelerate is an approved curriculum from the Department of Education. So Accelerate and Edgenuity, we thought it was important as we go into this new online model that we create a link. So you'll see there that Accelerate and Edgenuity, they're hot links. So families can go in, they can have the demo student code, and they'll be able to look at what the curriculum's going to look like. So for me, when I get, whether it be emails or whether I get Facebook messages or whatever the case might be, some families want to know what is it going to look like. So we've made sure that we're providing access to these 2 programs through the company to make sure that families can look there. Also, you'll see expectations will be very much different on the My School Online. What we are close to finalizing right now is just an overview of My School Online that we'll be able to send out to parents, put on the web page, put out on social media. So it's almost like a marketing tool, so to speak, in terms of what we want to make sure that we do, because I think, Mr. Destin, you've talked about it, Dr. Kelly, you've talked about it, Dr. White, you've talked about it, is Florida Virtual is real. So we want to make sure that we do a good job of highlighting My School Online, highlighting Okaloosa Online, so families know that there's confidence in coming to My School Online. So the teacher-to-student interaction, I think, is critical. The student-to-student interaction is critical, that we're able to provide that. But what you will also see is there's very clear teacher expectations, and that'll be part of this plan, that's part of the document. It'll be an addendum to the plan, and there will be student expectations as well. So I think from the teacher standpoint, student expectations are important. From the parent and family standpoint, I think teacher expectations are important, so everyone understands specifically the requirements. We've already talked about attendance will be taken. Right now, you'll see and this is a tweak that we've made right now based on input from all the different entities. And you'll see that third bullet towards the bottom, 1 semester enrollment is recommended. And at first it was going to be required, but we've received a lot of input, so we appreciate. But students may transition back to school after the first 9 weeks. We do not want it to be during the 9 weeks because staffing may have to be adjusted, class size may have to be adjusted. So naturally at the end of 9 weeks, or naturally at the end of a semester, it makes more sense to do so. And then the last expectation you'll see down there at the bottom, a device and internet access may be required, but if you're a free and reduced lunch student, we will provide that. And then if there are families who might be struggling, so to speak, because maybe they have 3 children, they may have 4 children, and they do not have enough devices, we'll work individually with those families through the schools to help them where we can.
Mr. Chambers, I have a question regarding the second bullet point under expectations. What is our plan in place to ensure that we are following up on students who are not regularly attending?
No, I appreciate the question. So one of the teacher expectations will be that'll be one of their responsibilities. And Ms. Lightbourne, if you could come forward. So teachers, even in the first 2 weeks, that they'll make contact with every student. But specifically to your question, Ms. Lightbourne, I have a little bit more information on that.
So teachers will be making contact, like Mr. Chambers said in the beginning, the first day, first week, both by email and by phone. Then they're required to progress monitor 2 times a day to see the progress of the student and make sure that they're progressing appropriately. Also, they'll have 60 minutes a day of live interaction with the student. So at that time, students can come on and ask questions. The teacher, if it's a science teacher, could potentially demonstrate a science lab that we can't ask the kids to do in their homes, but they'd at least be able to watch the lab occur. They may go over a difficult topic in another content area, so that will happen daily, 60 minutes a day as well. So there will be a lot more contact between the student and the teacher than there is in any other platform, online platform. That's why it's our hybrid model.
Right, and I appreciate that, but I was more talking about the student that doesn't sign on, that doesn't,
Right. So hopefully this time, so I'm being
Right.
hopeful, it's a choice that they're choosing, where last time it was not. Everybody had to go on, and people were not prepared for
Right.
that, and that was difficult for some people to be able to do. Our office hours for our teachers are going to be from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So if teachers feel like that their office hours need to be a little later to accommodate the students that they're working with, then they will also have that ability. Teachers will be required to work 6 hours, however, within that 8 to 8. So as far as the teacher is going to be the main person who's going to be working with getting that student on, having them progress properly. That's why they're checking on their progress 2 times a day. Now, if with all of that, we're still not getting on, then we'd go to the school. So remember, in this model, the student is still connected to their school. So
Right.
I'm a Ruckle student, I'm still a Ruckle student, I'm just taking my courses in this format. I still get Ruckle updates, I get my emails from Ruckle, et cetera. So in that sense, then that teacher would report to Ruckle's administration, they would go through their process, and then eventually it would go to our attendance officers.
Okay. And I also appreciate the fact that we're explaining that online this coming up school year is going to be totally different than it was the last 9 weeks.
Absolutely, and just going just a little bit further on that, Mr. Bryant. So the online, once again, there's a one-sheeter. It's almost like I'll call it almost like a marketing online, so they can see clearly what it is. Then there'll be 2 other documents, a teacher expectations sheet, a student expectations sheet, and we're creating a video that's going to highlight My School Online so families can see it in print, but also hear specifically what we're doing as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Thank you, Ms. Lightboard.
So to go a little further on the next slide, the changing expectations for My School Online, just going to kind of walk through these because I think it's important. If you look on the left side represents the last 9 weeks. The right side represents this upcoming school year. So if you look at the first box, which is actually the second, and you see compassion and grace in all facets of the process. You know, the last 9 weeks we had families that were thrust into this zero choice. Some have never done online. Teachers have never done online. So that was important. But as we go into this upcoming school year, we'll continue with compassion and grace, but with higher expectations and accountability for students. And like I shared a second ago, there'll be a teacher and student expectation sheet. That next one down, students were not required to complete all work other than quizzes and tests in the last 9 weeks. In this upcoming year, they'll have to complete each of the assignments just like they would in school, in the school day, and the quizzes and tests as well. Students were allowed to take quizzes and tests up to 10 times each. Even Florida Virtual has a certain amount of times that you can take quizzes and tests. The goal is to get mastery. But in this upcoming school year, there'll be opportunities to earn mastery, and that'll be available for all students. However, it would not be 10 times. So our teachers will be working with our students and families as they go through that process. Also, expectations for student pacing, they were not formalized the last 9 weeks, and part of that was because of families. You know, some were working, some were not working. At the elementary level, you could have had a family that they had no choice but go to work, and then of course having an elementary student sign on and do everything on their own could be difficult. As we go into this upcoming school year, there'll be a more formalized schedule, more formalized expectations, like Mrs. Lightbourne was talking about, such as the 60 minutes a day. The teacher will set that time, then that's when those students would come in. Then students were able to finish the year in their enrolled courses, and what we mean by that is if whatever elective course that they were in the last 9 weeks, that's what we kept them in, and our teachers delivered instruction through their Dropbox. Now in this upcoming school year, if they want to go online, they would choose the electives that are offered within the online model. So they'd have to do that from those choices. And in the last box there, the program lasted for 9 weeks, and you'll see right there where it says students remain enrolled through the semester, and that was one of the adjustments. But so students, we will recommend that they stay through the semester, so there'll be a change there, but they could also come back at the end of the 9 weeks. Okay?
Before we move on, any questions or comments regarding the slide? Okay. I do have.
Just a comment
Go
or
ahead.
question, if I might.
Go ahead, Dr.
I
Kelly.
appreciate Mr. Chambers' comments that he stays in close contact with Dr. Chapman. And again, in these crazy times, that must be done. So my assumption then is that she is fully on board with our plan to reopen in August the 11th.
She has been a part of the work group, and she was a part of the community group as well. So she's been a part of this every step of the way.
Thank
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
She is in agreement though, right?
For us reopening schools, yes. Now, does she have certain thoughts about what we need to do? Absolutely, and we're going to go through some of those thoughts.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. I do have one question regarding the electives that some may not be available for online, but let's say a student needs an elective that is imperative for, I mean, it's not necessarily a graduation requirement, but it might be something that they're looking forward to going into college. Will they have that option to maybe attend school for that particular elective?
So that they would have the ability to do that.
Okay, thank you.
And I do want to go back to Dr. Kelly's question on Dr. Chapman. So as we do know that it's mandated that way that we open back up to school. So she understands that. So she's a healthcare professional. She understands where we are in Okaloosa County in terms of the numbers, where we are with hospitalizations. So she might have her own opinions on that, but she understands that we're opening schools back up, and she has not balked on that at all, but she has given input in terms of safety measures that we need to make sure that we have in place.
And Mr. Chambers, in regards to the previous comment, I think it's pretty clear that in not all situations regarding the kinds of things that school systems have had to do, that the medical advice and the medical opinion might be diverse. And I'm not sure exactly where our own health department is with all of this. And I know certainly in terms of the original CDC guidelines, they were very complicated and very difficult. I think those are being revised. I think some of that probably ought to be all considered as we head into this. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So now we move into the traditional school. On this slide here, just reiterates the governor's approach. On that first quote there, open up campuses at full capacity for the traditional start of the school year. And then, of course, we have the emergency order that mandates that all schools be open 5 days a week for students. So now we're going to kind of shift into what we call the public health and safety measures. And like I've shared with whether it be principals, whether it be SAC chairs, whether it be community members, so there are several measures that are all coming together to make sure that we open schools up as safely as possible. In this first sheet here, you'll just see, just for your ease, each section kind of has a summary sheet. So that's just for you as you continue to peruse through here. And then we'll flip to the next slide. So the first one is encouraging social distancing. So as you know, sure all of you have, so we all know that we have students, we have kids, some of us have our own kids, and kids, I think, by nature want to come together. And then you enter a school building, and keeping students social distance can be even more difficult. So I think in a lot of our superintendent meetings, I think that there may be superintendents across the state who think it's very difficult to keep students social distance while at school. However, there are measures that we're definitely going to take to help that. So the first measure is setting up classrooms to allow for the maximum space within a classroom. So several weeks ago, our principals were directed to start looking at their classrooms, what could come out of classrooms in order to create more space. So at the elementary level, for example, our schools have done a great job. They've created reading corners. They may have 2 different kidney tables for small group instruction. So some of those items are going to have to come out of classrooms in order to space our desks out as much as possible. So 6 feet in a classroom spaced out with 22 kids, as you can imagine, would be very difficult. And let's just say that we were going to go to 10 kids in a classroom in order to space. So one, as you know, 10 kids in a classroom would be very difficult from a funding model. And then 10 kids in a classroom, in terms of classroom space, there wouldn't be classroom space to do so. So it's imperative that we maximize our classroom space in order to space students out accordingly. So that's one measure. Also, within the classroom, limiting small group instruction. Now, small group instruction has been a vital piece of our academic success. However, we have to make sure that we're doing things as safely as possible. So you'll see there where we have small group instructions happening. So whether face shields, whether we have barriers, so there's other things that we've prepared for. So we have made sure that every student, and I'll get to this more as we go forward, we have masks for every student, every employee. We've purchased about 10,000 face shields. We're purchasing barriers as well, those plastic type barriers. So small group instruction also may have to be done differently. It may have to be done in a manner where they're sitting in their rows, and a teacher may have to group kids accordingly in their rows and do small group instruction that way. So things will look differently this upcoming school year in the classrooms. Then moving forward to, we know we have to make sure that we look at the hallways. As you know, if you've been in a middle school hallway or a high school hallway, it's an active area. And what we also know from talking with Dr. Chapman is 15 minutes sustained within the 6-foot barrier is where if someone was symptomatic, and that's where that could be transmitted more so. So even in the locker hall where they won't be in contact for 15 minutes, we still think it's important to make sure that there's traffic flow. So you'll see different traffic flow patterns in schools this upcoming year, as well as you'll hear here shortly at the secondary level, we're going to block scheduling, where it might be periods 1, 3, 5, and 7 on one day, and then periods 2, 4, 5, and 6 the next day. And that's one measure to lessen the amount of kids in the hallway. So it's one of many measures to continuing to do what we can do safely. Then you'll see there in that next bullet, as feasible, looking at converting different areas into classrooms. One of the suggestions that's come from the state and other areas is if you can go outside on good days, go outside on good days and you can teach the lesson. But also whether it be the cafeteria, utilizing space, whether it be an auditorium, utilizing space, these will be different areas that the schools will be looking at to maximize space within a school building. And then eating meals, which we'll go deeper into that as well as we go forward. So the cafeteria, so Mr. Horton's already given the principals the directive to look at how can we limit the cafeteria by 25%, for example. And as we go forward here, you're going to see a number of the steps that we're putting into place to thin out the cafeteria, which I think is important. So social distancing in a cafeteria, and once again, if you've had the blessing to go into a middle school cafeteria, there's a lot of activity there. Going into 1.2, maintaining safety precautions on buses. So we've looked at buses. I think in order to social distance appropriately, we'd have to purchase over 300 more buses, and which would mean hiring 300 more bus drivers. So Okaloosa, as well as the other 66 districts, likely won't be doing that. So then what can we do to social distance as best we can on a school bus? As some of you know, in some of our buses in the past, you could have 4 little ones on a seat. It's not uncommon to have 3 little ones on a seat. So our goal will be to have 2 to a seat as we go into the school year. You'll see there the masks. Masks will be required on school buses. That's part of the plan. We also understand that there's cloth masks. And we also understand that it could be a kindergartner, it could be a first grader, it could be hot, it could be one of our buses that aren't air conditioned. So we'll have to be mindful of that. What we do not want to do is get into a situation where the kindergarten student takes their mask off and now they're getting disciplined. We want to make sure if that happens, we're talking to their family. We're talking about the importance of safety for themselves and others. But masks right now on the school bus would be required, and that's because if you're even 2 to a seat, you might have 6 inches apart. So that'll be something that we're going through right now in summer school. The kids are wearing their masks on the bus, and it's staying on the bus from what's reported to me, and they're coming off the bus with the mask, so that's a good trial run as well. After each run, the morning run and the afternoon run, the buses will be cleaned and the buses will be sanitized as well.
Okay, Mr. Chambers, I hate to do this, but we're going to recess. We have some more technical difficulties, so we'll be recessing. Okay, so we are back, and to the public that has been patiently waiting to watch this important workshop that we're doing today, we apologize, but hopefully we've fixed our technical difficulties with our board members who are participating via telephone. We have set up Zoom for a couple of them, and Dr. White is still participating by phone, so we do apologize, but Mr. Horton, I believe you were, or Mr. Chambers, I'm sorry, we'll go ahead and reconvene.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate it, and
Okay, so we are back, and to the public that has been patiently. Okay. We're good. Go ahead, Mr. Chambers.
All right. Fantastic. Okay. So we're still under public health and safety measures. We're on 1.3. And in this section, we thought it important to make sure that we addressed, limiting unnecessary contact during the school day. And one of the things that we're very blessed here in Okaloosa County in terms of our school district is the amount of visitors that we have that come to our schools, the amount of volunteers that we have that come to our schools. In this proposed reopening plan, we looked at visitors, and basically for the health and safety of our students and our employees, we would not allow visitors to come to school during the first 9 weeks. Now, that doesn't mean that a parent couldn't come up to the front office and drop something off or do those types of things, but in terms of volunteering in the classrooms or coming to eat in the cafeteria for the first 9 weeks, and then we would reassess it, that we wouldn't allow visitors to come into the school. Then you look at volunteers, and many of you know, because you've been in the schools, Dr. White, Dr. Kelly, being principal at the schools, that some volunteers, many people wouldn't even know that they weren't employees, that they come almost every day or multiple times a week. So an example of that would be the attendance offices. So in areas where the volunteer is critical to the mission of the school, we would still allow that. But volunteers in terms of going into the classrooms, we would not for at least the first 9 weeks. The volunteers would have to do the temperature check as well as the precautions that we're taking as a school district, but the volunteers would be required to wear masks as well. Then you look at parent meetings. As you know, it is critical that we get our parents in our schools in terms of parent-teacher conferences, IEP meetings, and so forth. But what we would do is continue what happened the fourth 9 weeks, where whether it be Zoom meetings, whether it be phone meetings, we would encourage that. In areas where it couldn't happen, we would set up a space in the school to where the parent could come in and still have the meeting, but there'd be a strong encouragement to do it via other means. And then I got into this a little bit already earlier, block scheduling as another method of one more measure to limit contact. So, and this would happen at the middle school and the high school level. Schools and principals are already working through this. And once again, this has gone through the work group, it's gone through principals, it's gone through an exhaustive process in terms of getting where we are. So very proud of our principals, because this is different. This is definitely different, but they're already working hard in order to do what they need to do. And as a reminder, so this might look like on Monday, periods 1, 3, 5, and 7. On Tuesday, periods 2, 4, 5, and 6. So fifth period would be the constant. We also need to make sure that we have a constant in terms of attendance, so we can do so. We know that at the high school level, for example, period 1, period 7, there's kids who take no class, so that's not a good constant class to have each week. Period 5 is what right now, especially a lot of the principals like in terms of a constant class. So these are just some of the measures right here we're looking at in terms of limiting contact during the school day. But then you start going into limiting sharing. I think since the inception of parenting and since the inception of public education, we've taught our kids to share. Now, this upcoming school year, we will teach our kids not to share appropriately. And so you look at students, we want to teach them to keep their own belongings right now to themselves. So minimize the sharing of high-touch areas. such as our electronics, books, games. But in the instances where those are shared, after each use, those items will be cleaned with wipes. And I'm jumping a little bit, but just because I'm talking about wipes, Mr. Horton and his group, Dr. Smith and his group, they've already acquired these big buckets that have stronger type wipes that you pour solution into. These wipes will last a very a good amount of time, and they've also intelligently secured already the refills. So we already have enough wipes. As you know, it's very difficult to get them right now. We already have enough wipes to be able to go far into the school year. So I appreciate that planning by Mr. Horton and Dr. Smith there. Looking at encouraging students to bring their own device. So at the secondary level, we would encourage students to bring their own devices. As you know, we do have devices in our schools. We have a good bit. Now, in areas where a student does not have their own device, once again, those items would be cleaned after each use. But through the CARES Act money at the elementary level, very excited that we are going to go 1-to-1. So we'll be going 1-to-1. So every K2 student would have an iPad. Every 3 through 5 students would have a Chromebook. And at this time, I'd like Mr. Horton to give a little bit more information.
Just real briefly to remind board members, the iPads are not a seat-managed device through Teleforce. So iPads are purchased at the school level typically, and then we support those in information systems with Bill Hagan in terms of helping with repairs and downloading apps and things like that. So there is no ongoing cost of purchasing iPads. But just to be clear and transparent, on the Chromebook side, we do use those and procure those through Teleforce. So anytime we handle and deal with Chromebooks, there is the potential for ongoing recurring costs. So the CARES Act is helping us fund enough Chromebooks to be able to go 1-to-1 at the elementary level. There are provisions, and to jump off topic, in the if the voters are of a mind to approve our half-cent sales tax or surtax in the fall, one of the components in that plan is technology. And so it's possible that we could do some work to keep working in a 1-to-1 environment. And again, the COVID environment has shown us, if nothing else, that it's good to have a device in the kids' hands so that we're not scrambling to check them out and do other sorts of things. So, but the fallback for this obviously would be if there's no funding available after this year, and we believe it's important this year, both from the COVID standpoint, but also these devices at K-5 are critical in the progress monitoring for students and the achievement gap piece, and Ms. Lightborn can speak some more to that. But in the event funding was not available down the road with Chromebooks, it's a very simple matter of, during our refresh process every year in our current seat contract with Teleforce, there are thousands of devices that get refreshed. And so it's very possible to work these devices into it in year 2 and year 3 if, for whatever reason, we did not have available funding to keep them in that level. So there's an understanding in this process that that's a reality out there, but we have a plan if the funding source is not available ongoing to do that, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. And then you'll also see there on the limited sharing, you'll see there that second to last bullet, it talks about wiping down desks and devices between uses. Now, one of the things that we've talked to all the groups on is the fact that it's going to take everybody. It's going to take a team in order to keep our schools clean and to keep our schools sanitized. So we know that we do not have enough custodians to come in between each class and wipe down everything. But what we do know is through our teamwork with our teachers, our educational support staff, and through our students, where appropriate, we can make sure that we're wiping down those desks and wiping down those items that we must share before each use. And then moving on to limit large group settings. So I think we all know that we want to limit the congregation of students coming together in large numbers to the extent possible. I think that is that's important. But then you look at the cafeteria, the gym, or the auditorium. Now, normally at the beginning of the school year, we may have grade level assemblies where everybody comes in, they all get the same information. We set the stage for student code of conduct, all of those things. So this fall, those types of matters will happen. Those type of matters will happen through Zoom. Normally, we have orientations where families come in. That's going to be done differently. There'll be videos that will be created. Now, we are looking at the possibility of kindergarten coming into the school because of it's kindergarten, and they think it's important, and it is, as well as 6th grade and 9th grade where there's transitions. But all of those will happen in small group settings as we go into the school year. Then looking at limiting large group outdoor activities. So let's talk about PE. Let's talk about recess. So at least me, for one, I get questions on recess. Are you going to eliminate recess? And then they don't wait for the answer. And if you do, I'm not going to be happy. Is a lot of the communication that I have. So we're not intending to limit recess or PE, but what we are looking at doing, for example, let's just say that there's 100 students that might go outside. Well, they might not go out in groups of 100, or if they do go out in groups of 100, where in the past maybe they're all playing together, and play is important, especially right now, but they might be in groups. And in those groups, the students would stay together in that cohort, and they might not rotate to a new station, so to speak, until the next day. The monkey bars or the apparatuses that those kids use. So there's a plan in place to make sure that those are cleaned as well. Then you look at locker rooms. As you know, PE, so the locker room, so that's an area where kids change out. They're kind of grouped up on top of each other. So the locker rooms would be closed. They'd be suspended at the beginning of the year, probably for at least the first 9 weeks, but we would gauge that as the year goes on. And then, of course, pep rallies, which adds to the culture of a school, which adds to the excitement of a school and kids coming together. Unfortunately, in this environment, we would not be able to have normal pep rallies. Some schools might get creative and have other means via Zoom, but right now, for the foreseeable future, indoor pep rallies would not occur. Also on the limiting group setting, so cafeterias. And Mr. Destin, you know, obviously running a restaurant, what that means. So cafeterias, we're getting very creative. So first of all, we obviously want to make sure that kids are spaced out as much as possible. So principals have already been working on how can they get 25% less students in the cafeteria at a time. That's one measure. Two, we're looking at spreading out schedules, where a school might have 2 lunch waves or a school might have 3 lunch waves. A school that has 3 lunch waves might have 4 next year. The ones that had 2 will have 3 next year. So they're working through their master schedules, so to speak, and they're trying to thin out the cafeteria as much as possible. But then also looking at other spaces. So we talked about earlier, what are other spaces? So classrooms, we've challenged our principals to find, other classroom space. So I might be a student who brings my lunch to school. That student may not ever need to even enter the lunchroom. They might just enter the classroom, or even, as crazy as it sounds, the media center. And we just have to make sure that we would clean that afterwards, understand that there's carpet in there, but we have to be able to space our kids out and eat lunch as safely as possible. Of course, if you've had the pleasure to go through a lunch line before, you know that the kids might scoop their own food. So that would be eliminated as well, as a lot of restaurants do as well, and they would be served. The cafeteria workers wearing masks, we think that is important in that environment. And then, of course, the cleaning protocols, making sure that we're being very mindful of high-touch areas, making sure that we're cleaning diligently in between waves as well. When you get to 1.6 in terms of the safety measures, field trips, and I give this example, I can still remember some of the field trips when I was young, especially Revolutionary War type field trips. I remember it to this day. It's important, but where we are right now, field trips, at least for the first 9 weeks, would be suspended. Specialized student populations. We know right now it is very important to be reviewing our healthcare plans, our IEP plans, our 504 plans with families. So that's part of a process right now, and making sure that we're looking at what safety measures might need to be put in place. An example of that could be speech and language, for example, where the teacher and the student, they're kind of up close and personal. It's important to see the mouth. It's important to see the tongue movement, all of those things. So we have to make sure we're putting safety measures in place. And some of those safety measures might be the shield that the employee and the student wear. It could be the plexiglass that's put up as well. So we have to make sure that we're looking for the safety piece and making sure that through that health plan, academically, physically, socially, that kids are able to continue to fulfill those IEPs, 504 plans, or health plans, and do so safely. Dr. Willis Doxey and Ms. Lightbourne are also going through a more in-depth plan for our students with special needs. As you can imagine, Silver Sands, Richburg, some of our VE classes, and so forth. So there'll be more detail to come on that. Then we move into Section 2, and that's the personal, preventative, and screening protocols that we think are important as we start this upcoming school year. Once again, this first slide is a summary, so you can kind of just see the items that we'll be paying attention to. But getting into 2.1, the preventative screening. So we think it's very important that all of our staff is also trained in terms of being as knowledgeable as possible. They won't be experts, but being as knowledgeable as possible of symptoms of COVID-19. And that'll be done during pre-planning, but we will also be, through Terry Schroeder and her group, be sending all OCSD employees information throughout the rest of the summer so they can become as knowledgeable as possible. We also know that we have to control and monitor entry points at school, especially during arrival, during dismissal, but also as visitors might come to the school in terms of they may need to drop off medication or there's business that needs to be done. So we have to pay attention to that. And they would also be a part of the same protocols we have, such as daily temperature checks for all of our students, all of our employees. There'll be daily temperature checks as well as health screening for the entry of staff and students. Of course, this has to be confidential, as you know. But our goal is for this to happen within the first 15 minutes of arrival. So we have already secured hundreds of non-touch temperature thermometers. So we've already secured hundreds of those. Schools already have a number of them. More are being shipped, and we want to make sure our schools have enough thermometers. And you know how taken it is, especially at the start of the year. But we want to make sure our schools have enough thermometers to have an organized method of taking each student's temperature and staff member at the start of the year and going forward for the foreseeable future. It's also important that we have an isolated area if somebody had symptoms, or if during the school day someone got word that they were positive. So not only will we have the health tech room, but we'll also have a separated area that if someone had symptoms or was determined to be positive, that person would go in that area. One thing I've said to every group during this time is, do we think, just being very real, being very transparent, do we think that we'll have an employee this year that will have COVID-19? Every group has said yes. Do we think that there will be a student? Yes. However, all of these preventative measures are necessary to do everything that we can do to keep our employees and students as safe as possible, and having a separate area we think is critical. Then looking at our on-site health techs, I think they're important to this process as well in terms of helping educate our employees and taking part in the screening process. Then you move to 2.2 and you start looking at personal protective measures. So one, we know that we have to do a good job of educating our employees educate, and our students educate, and our families. Something as simple as, but do we all do it? You know, the washing of our hands for 20 seconds, making sure that we do that, keeping our hands away from our face, social distancing. So everything that we're talking about here, there also will be signage. So all the schools are going to be equipped with signs that we can post, which we believe is an important part of these measures. Also educating families, and they know, but when their child is sick, or sometimes, you know, we send them to school because tough it out. I think it's important that this year especially, that if their child is sick or the employee is sick, that we stay home. So getting that information out is going to be something that we will do. Preventative supplies in every classroom. So every classroom, like I said earlier, every student will be provided a mask. Every employee will be provided a mask as well. Hand sanitizer will be in classrooms. The sanitation wipes that we talked about earlier will be in classrooms as well. We also will permit this year for students to have hand sanitizer on their person. We think that's important, as well as, you know, an item such as headphones that normally we provided, which we will, but part of the supply list, we would encourage families to have their own headsets, as well as bring their own water bottles as well. Moving on 2.2, still in the personal protective measures, masks. So masks is a big topic right now, as you know. In my communication, I have it all over the board. I have the individuals who say, if you make my child wear a mask, I will be suing you right away. Then I have the opposite side that says everyone in the school better be wearing a mask all day, every day, and then you have people that funnel to the middle. But it's across the board. And what we have to do is make the best decision possible for Okaloosa County. So the first bullet you'll see here is in order to ensure the safest environment possible, we are going to let time continue to go by until the school year gets here. And I'm not saying on August 10th we're going to make the decision. That's not what I'm saying. But we're going to let a little bit more time go forward until we make a decision on anything being mandatory with masks. And I respect, and I know we all do, respect everyone's opinion as it pertains to masks. But what I know very well, and I'm sure you do as well, is there are opinions across the board on that, where some believe that if you wear masks, it can sustaining over time, that can do harm. And I'm not saying that, but that's what many believe. And then, of course, there's many who believe that you should have it on always. But here's where our current stance is in the plan. And I'm going to just, because I want to be very clear, that we've secured masks, once again, for every student, every employee. And at this time, masks are strongly recommended everywhere in the building where social distancing cannot be maintained according to CDC guidelines. I'll be very honest. There are, once again, there are some who want to make it mandatory. There are some who want to make it mandatory. There are some who are upset that we're strongly encouraging it. Okay? But then you go down to the school bus as it pertains to masks, and that is where we would make masks mandatory based on reasons that I shared earlier. Continuing on with personal protective measures. So we are looking at plexiglass and plastic barriers for small group instructions and in individual stations as needed, as well as for some of our students with disabilities. And Mr. Horton, Dr. Smith, and others are working on that, which I appreciate. I shared earlier that we've gone through the process of getting about 10,000 face shields, so that will help our employees and students where we can. And then keeping in mind the face shields, a lot of them are made for adults. A lot of the masks are made for adults, so we're working with the health department as well as trying to find the adolescent masks as well. So I think that's important. The school-wide signage, like I shared earlier, I think is going to be very important, as well as signage that we put on our webpage, that we send out on social media. I think we almost have to do a campaign on this to continue to educate and just keep the word out there about being safe. And then we're also creating some instructional videos as well to help, whether it be masks, whether it be the hand washing, and so forth.
Mr. Chambers, I do have a quick question regarding masks in general. So, I know we're going to wait until it's a little bit closer, but as far as masks go, which are any type of mask, let's say if a parent has their child wear a mask from home, are we limiting it to which mask can come to the school, or is it going to be the choice of the parent versus the choice of the school, what we put out there?
So we will have a mask for everybody, but if a student comes with their own mask, they would be able to do so as long as that mask is an appropriate mask. So we'll provide them, but families will be able to utilize their own masks.
Okay.
I had a mask question also, and the disposable masks, I guess, is what we will have on hand. What are we going to have?
We do have a large number of disposable masks on hand for buses and situations like that where a student may come without one, but these are actually cloth masks, and they've been provided through the Department of Health and at the state level as well. So they are washable and rewearable. The disposable ones right now, even in bulk, are about 50 cents or a little bit less a piece. And so over
I hear you,
time, to
Dr.
keep
Kelly.
using those, the cost would get high very quickly.
And that's exactly where I was going with this question. If we have 35,000 students and staff, and we provide one a day, that comes out to, what, 750,000 a month at 20 days?
I'll trust your math on that, and it's astronomical, and that's why I think in this case, the cloth masks that are reusable and washable, so part of the instructional videos Mr. Chambers referred to would be to educate parents on how to wash and treat those and how to keep up with them, because we've got kids, and so some of them will lose them, but we're thankful the Department of Health helped us out on that, so we didn't have to expend any of our CARES money on that bulk of masks. Now, we have purchased some disposable ones, as you said, to have an inventory, but you're right about that cost. That can go up in a hurry.
How many masks do we have?
We have about 70,000 masks by last count at Carver Hill on 3 pallets. They come in bags of 5. So we have that, and then Dr. Smith and I have kind of early on in the summer reached out and bought some masks here or there to kind of look at the quality of them. We probably, and we're getting ready to, we probably have 20,000 or about to have 20,000 disposable masks. But again, I don't think the intent is to keep supplying students with cloth masks over and over again.
Right.
I don't think that's economically feasible.
Well,
But your point is well taken.
and it's going to be a problem. That sounds like about 3 or 4 days worth if we had to give one to each student every day. And
That's not the
as you can say,
plan.
we can't do that.
Yeah, that's not the plan, no, sir.
I believe Dr. Kelly has a question. Go ahead, Dr. Kelly.
I did. I wondered if anyone would reach out to the shoe foundations and making child-sized face shields for our students. Very generous in providing face shields for organizations.
Okay, can you repeat the question?
Yes, I just wondered if anyone had reached out. I just wondered if anyone had reached out to the Shoe Foundation about making face shields that would be student or child size. Now they've been wonderful about providing those that are adult size.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, and I actually just had an email from the Shoe Foundation regarding face shields. As you know, the STEM Academy worked this summer to help produce with 3D printers some face shields and headpieces. And so we have secured several thousand face shields, but that is a good opportunity to partner to receive more. And I did just get that email in the last day or two. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just particularly about student size.
No, and you're breaking up a little bit, Dr. Kelly, but I think what you said is, especially as it pertains to student sizes, so I think that's a great suggestion, and we will do that, so we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I apologize for the audio. It's very shaky over here.
Hey,
Yeah.
no problem, but we appreciate it. So looking at 2.3, systemic disinfecting and cleaning protocols. So what we do know is that we will and are establishing standards for disinfection and cleaning of areas throughout the school day, especially high-touch areas. So in the past, we didn't necessarily walk around and clean the doorknobs or the push bars or other areas that are high frequency touch areas. But that will be part of the process as well. The bathrooms, additionally, you'll see that there'll be some schedules that will be created where the custodian during the day knows that at this time that they're to go around and do this, and making sure that we're touching those high touch areas. Principals are also adjusting custodial hours. So historically, a lot of our custodians have been working in at night because the students aren't there, so we can clean the facility better and be more maximized. But what will happen is we will have some custodians who will be there during the school day as well. Once again, to make sure that we can hit those high frequency areas and making sure that not only are we cleaning, but we're disinfecting as well. Okay, and then I go to that last bullet there. Just once again, just reiterating, it's going to take a team approach. Our district, probably like the other 66 districts, don't have enough custodians to come in between each class and wipe down every class plus all the high touch areas. So it's going to take us all working together to clean and disinfect where appropriate.
Would that be something, Mr. Chambers, where we're talking about educating proper sanitation and all, where maybe after a class is done, the students actually grab a wipe and wipe their table down and then proceed on to the next class? Is that something that we're looking?
Absolutely. And once again, now we'd want to make sure at the elementary level, and some of it may be where the principal and the teacher is working with the parents to make sure that they sign off that they're good with it. The same thing at the secondary level. But I will say, in this new environment, to get things done, as you know, when there's 4 or 5 minutes in between a class period, and the kids have to get to the next class as well, so there's another group coming. So if the students are a part of that process where appropriate, yes.
And I believe that's probably something that's going on at the house, because you can't find any wipes anywhere in this county. So obviously households have stocked up, and hopefully they're teaching their young ones to use those wipes even at the house.
Yes, sir.
So hopefully they're teaching them good habits at the house and bringing that to the schools, so, which I believe our parents are. So.
I do too. I do too. Continuing on with 2.3, you'll see rapid response team. With the CARES Act money, we thought it was important to get more custodians. And this rapid response team, it will be a group of 10 custodians that will do, at a minimum, 2 things. One, the custodians will fill in for custodians who are absent, so we can make sure that we keep up with the cleaning and disinfecting. But 2, if there was a situation where we had a positive, this group would be deployed by Mr. Horton to that area to make sure that we clean and disinfect. We're even talking about this group of 10 to having a different type of a shirt, so we know that they are a part of the rapid response team, and it's very clear and it's very visual in terms of who they are. Then you look at expectations for daily cleaning. So we know if it's a small group or a one-on-one session, any of those materials that may have been shared, that we want to make sure that we're cleaning them. We're wiping down all keyboards and computers within a lab after each use. Educating staff and children on keeping work areas clean. And then you look down, the nightly cleaning protocols for custodians will likely have to change some. And once again, because we got to make sure that we're doing a good job of high frequency touched areas, bathrooms, and so forth.
Well, I have a question regarding custodial staff as is. I know we made a switch a couple years ago to where the principals actually oversee the custodial staffs. Is it normal for custodial staffs to work overnight? I mean, from 11 o'clock, let's say 11 or 10 o'clock at night till like 6 o'clock in the morning?
Yes, sir. Schools typically have what's called a day custodian that will come in the beginning of the day and unlock the campus so that the folks can get into it in the morning, and then be there until about 2 o'clock or whatever their hourly time is. Then at some point, in a lot of schools, again, depending on the size of the school, mid-morning, lunchtime, you might have another custodial come in, or cleaners, as you know, they're 3.5-hour employees, to begin to help do some of the other pieces involved. But for a lot of campuses, custodial works in the afternoon and early evening. So again, they're going into classrooms and sweeping and emptying trash and things that they don't typically get to do when students and teachers are there. So that is part of our model. The principals do oversee those custodial now, and they are responsible for assigning their hours. And so what we've done is we've talked to our principals about moving some, not all, but some of their custodial support more into the day so they can address the things
Right.
as the day's going on.
Right. So is it typical that a night custodial, is it a team or is it just one person that's there?
There's a formula that's been developed that's based on the size of the school, the age of the school, the type of facility, in terms of how many hours of custodial labor is assigned to each one.
Okay.
And so a larger, older high school may have 7 or 8 different individuals for custodial, whereas a smaller school might have 3 or 4. And then again, there's a variety of 7.5-hour employees versus 3.5-hour employees that are referred to as cleaners.
Well, I mean, that's for another discussion another time, but I was just curious how that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
This next section, section 3, I'm going to kind of go by quickly, and I know you'll read it, but in essence, what section 3 is, it's just a progress monitoring section, and who's responsible for what. So just for example, Mr. Horton's responsible right now, in essence, for all things COVID-19 and the operations part of that. But then if you go to cafeteria, Mr. Anderson, you go to transportation, Mr. McGinnis, Dr. Smith in the maintenance facilities area. So in terms of the custodial pieces, so each person over that area has a responsibility to make sure that we're progress monitoring and that we're doing what we say we're going to do. So that's what that section is about right there. Then if you'd move forward towards district communication, and I'm going to go towards after the summary sheet. So district communication, I think, throughout this entire process has been critical in making sure that we're keeping our families up to date, but also keeping our employees up to date. So what we definitely plan on doing as we get towards the school year and schools in session is making sure that we have regular and even weekly communication with families where we're putting out information to them. We think that this will be important to do our call-outs, keeping those going. So also within that, making sure that families update their phone numbers so we can get the call-outs to them. Making sure that we're doing a good job on our website. Like right now, we have a reopening schools section on our website where families can go get information. We'll continue with social media, but also continue making sure that we communicate with community agencies, our military liaisons. They were a part of our community work group as well. So it's important that we communicate with all of these individuals. As we go forward, once this plan is finished, which we hope after Monday's meeting, that we'll move forward and we will publish this plan out as well as all the addendums so families can see this plan. As you know, we've put out July 15th being a time where families would make their decision whether they wanted to be in the building or My School Online. We will extend that a little bit, and we're finalizing that date. It will likely be that next Monday, just to give families just a little more time. Keep it in mind that our assistant principals and principals normally are working through those master schedules in May and in June. They will have a task, and they'll get it done, but they will have a task getting these master schedules done, which is why it's important that once our families make the choices, that we continue to get to work. But we also understand that families are going to want to see this detailed plan, and we absolutely get that. As we get closer to school, we'll send another parent letter home as well. That'll be an informational letter. It won't be this entire plan because they'll already have seen this hopefully and dive into it, but we'll put a number of safety measures additionally in that letter as we start back to school. But we will also, in the communication, be asking families to help us out. You know, and you see some of those bullets there. If your child's sick, ask them to stay home. Helping parents become even more knowledgeable about symptoms. And I'm sure a lot of our parents are already knowledgeable, but there's certain things that we'll ask our parents to do as well. Continuing with the district communication, and some of this is a repeat, so I'm not going to go through it, but in each section it's important that these items are in there in terms of a plan. But from the hand washing to the masks to the reporting of symptoms to prepare a communication plan if someone becomes ill and if school closures are needed. Towards the back of this document, you're going to see, and this is a question that I'm sure you all get as school board members, and I know I get it. What are we going to do if a student or an employee tests positive, for example, and they're at school or not at school? So in that document that you'll see towards the end of this PowerPoint, and it'll be a part of the plan in a very well readable document. So there's certain things that we'll have to do, and I'll go through those towards the end here. But just for example, there will be a checklist of what the school does if someone's positive. There'll be a checklist of what the school has to do if someone's a contact. And there'll be a checklist of what the school has to do if someone's a contact of a contact. So you'll see that as we go forward. We have information in terms of school closure, for example. Some people say, how will a school close, okay? And what some, I think right now, believe that if there was one positive case that we would shut down a school, and in our communication with Dr. Chapman that would not necessarily be the case. So there's a number of measures that we would look at. There would have to be widespread within the community, widespread at the school in terms of closing a school. But as we go forward in this document, anything that was to be done in terms of closing a school would be done in conjunction with the health department, would be done in conjunction with the Department of Education. And from the information that we've received so far, there's probably a lot that would have to happen if we were to actually shut a school down.
I think looking at the private sector, when, businesses have had positive results, they haven't necessarily closed down their business because of that. But I know Mr. Destin and I were talking during the recess, a lot of it is because they have to close down because they don't have any employees to man the stations and all that. And that might possibly happen at the school level too.
It could. The last thing I would want to say on this, two things I'd like to say on this slide in terms of district communication as well. I alluded to it earlier, so the frequently asked questions document, so that will be there. It will be highly accessible, as well as the reopening at okaloosaschools.com. That's something that we will publish out. So anyone, whether it be an employee or a parent or community member, if they have a question, they'll go there, they'll pose the question. That's being monitored. We'll answer those questions, and if it's a question that's not in our frequently asked question document, we will put it in there if it makes sense to do so. As you go to section 5, this is in essence what happens now if we do have a positive case. So first of all, our school response team, each school will have a school response team, which they never in a million years thought that they would be creating that team. And we also will have a district COVID team that will coordinate the response. In all instances, if we have this, we'll be communicating directly with the health department. Dr. Chapman will be the first call, and she will help guide us through this process. I already talked a little bit about that document at the end. Schools will know that they would go to the document. Is it a positive? Is it a contact? Is it a contact of a contact? Then what do we do? So they have that document, and the health department is the one who's responsible for contacting the positive person or student and contacting the contacts of the positive student. Now, the question that's also been asked of me, and I'm sure of you, let's just say that there's a positive case at the school. Are we going to do an all-call and say that particular student in this class is tested positive or a particular employee is tested positive? We can't do that. Mr. McGinnis can elaborate on that more if you have a question. But where we are contemplating in order to be transparent because of where we are, is an individual has tested positive and we're going through our protocols. But to give, I know some people will want more information, and absolutely understand that, but we cannot violate any laws.
Yes, sir, that goes back to the HIPAA regulations, and we have also been in contact with the health department so that we understand the standards they use when they do their contract tracing. We know the questions they ask, the information they offer, and we will model our information release after the way the health department does the same thing.
Moving on to 5.2. Once again, we're in the scenario if there was a positive case and we're responding to it. In terms of the facility, we already talked earlier about making sure that we have that secondary location that's not the health room, because we have kids who are coming in to get their diabetes shots or get their medication. So that person would be quarantined, so to speak, to that isolated area. In terms of the cleaning of the facility, it's my understanding that we wait for 24 hours, or it's suggested to wait for 24 hours to keep that area closed and then come in and clean and disinfect. And that would also be a part of that rapid response team. And then during that time, we would relocate. Now, someone might ask the question, who are you relocating? Because what could happen with the contact tracing in a classroom, you might have a segment of kids through the contact tracing that may be quarantined, but there's a segment of the population that in that classroom that might not. That would be determined by the health department. So if there's a segment that might not, we would obviously have them go to an alternate location. Then you start looking at procedures and guidelines from the Department of Health. So we know that, once again, we know that we have to notify our health officials and the families of a positive case, and that's that child's family, of course, or the employee, dealing with the employee, notifying our custodial staff that they have to get to cleaning. So this section is just our response in terms of the communication, the cleaning, and things that we have to do to make sure that we're prepared to do what we need to do to get that area back in operation.
Did we lose somebody? Okay. We're going to take a short recess. Back.
Okay, and now we move to 5.4, and I will say, you can see that we're on 5.4, and you know that we started on 1.1, so there's a lot to do in order to make sure that we're reopening schools safely. But 5.4 is the cleaning protocols. I've already talked about if there was an issue, we would deploy the rapid response team, but also there are contraptions that we have that do sprayers, that we have the fogging machines as well. So we've already made sure that we have those items. And then, of course, the school's response team would then be notified when it's safe to reoccupy an area. In terms of, when I say the curriculum area in terms of attendance, so we know that if a student were to get COVID, we do not want our just normal attendance policies to be to penalize the student. Now, by law, the student has to be absent. But we know within our own pupil progression plan, we have makeup work policies, so to speak. So we would be very lenient in making sure that we are working with the student with the compassion and grace to do makeup work. Some students could be asymptomatic and would be able to work at the house. Some students could be out for 2 weeks, once again asymptomatic. They wouldn't necessarily go to my school online. It'd be just like a student who had a surgery or who may be sick, but they're still working just within the direction of the classroom teacher. Now, if a family decides that they wanted to go to my school online at that point, they'd have the ability to do so. Okay. Moving on to 5.6, decisions about school dismissal. So once again, any decision about school dismissal would be done in coordination with the health department and in coordination with the Department of Education. But part of this section is also, because we've received questions on if a school building were shut down, could we still come back in the building because we're still educating kids? And the answer to that is yes, with the caveat of, is this area has been cleaned, has been disinfected? So there's still a mission and work to be done, but this just provides the parameters where employees were able to come back into the building if necessary. Then moving over here to the next one, you'll see a school decision tree, because all of these things have to be planned out. You'll see over on the far right-hand side, which kind of helps elaborate on this diagram. And it says a single event would very likely not result in a school closing. Okay? And classroom space may be closed for a short period for cleaning and disinfecting. That's one statement. Also, regardless of community spread, identified staff and students transition to remote learning. So if there was a community spread and we had to shut down, similar to what we did the last 9 weeks, then we'd have the ability to go online. As you know, at that point, we'd have to really start looking at the distribution of devices again. At the elementary, they'd already be 1-to-1. At the secondary level, we'd have to do so. We'd have to prepare for the feeding, prepare for the online. Part of the work at the beginning of the school year, teachers will already be working on emergency lessons, so that if we had to go online until we were equipped to do so, they're already prepared with lessons as well. Coming down, we see low or no community spread. It says, well, students and staff return to school. So if they're well, they would return to school, and ill students would not. And then if there's moderate or substantial community spread, work with the health department to determine the possible extent of the school closure. So this is just a diagram that would help us also work through it, but of course we would be with the health department. And then the next few documents that I would allow you to kind of look through at your leisure is the help to the schools if a student was positive or an employee, if they were a contact, or if they were a contact of a contact, plus some helpful hints on if there were symptoms at a school and in terms of what we need to do.
I just want to make a mention to board members as well. To illustrate the change in which some of this is occurring, we had one set of instructions for if a student presented symptoms. We got some updates from that this week from the Department of Health, from Dr. Chapman, that we're not able to get to these by press time, so that's even different. But then we understand that the CDC is going to be set to come out with some new guidelines potentially next week that could completely change recommendations for what to do with certain types of students. So for now, I'm going to update this document to reflect our latest information and provide it to you so that you have the latest of what we have in that respect.
So with this, I meet with a group of teachers, meet via Zoom with a group of teachers tomorrow, a group of teachers on Monday as well. Our goal is to have this plan finalized, if not Monday night or Tuesday. And I do want to say, I do hope, and I know, but I do hope the board appreciates all the work that has gone into this. Not appreciate as appreciate, but just the work that has gone into this. The different groups that have come together to put this in place. I know some families would like to have this last week or 2 weeks ago already done, but we thought it was important not to rush this and hopefully get this right. As you know, just as early as this past Tuesday, we already got changing information. We got changing information as well from the health department, and those are good things. And just like we just said, the CDC guidelines may change again coming up. And if we do, that's fine, and we'll make adjustments. But our goal is to safely open up schools with a number of measures in place that's different than what we've normally done to hopefully have our students and our employees and our community and parents confident in what we're doing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chambers. I'm going to go around the table real quick. Mr. Destin, any comments?
Tremendous job. I can see this is a lot of work. I did have a couple of questions I was going to ask. I guess we looked at dual enrollment, which is the only way to truly social distance, and came to the conclusion that no money.
So when you say dual enrollment, clarify what you mean.
2 sessions a day, cutting the student numbers in half in the classrooms.
Yeah, I think the group did look at that, yes, sir. And so 2 options, a morning and an evening session. And so then if you do that, then the employee side of it in terms of if you only have half the kids coming in the day, then you may have extra expenses, employee expenses. The other piece of it that was considered was if you said, certain groups come on Monday, Wednesday, other groups come on Tuesday, Thursday, and then maybe everybody comes on Friday or everybody stays home on Friday. I think as we looked at that across the spectrum of students, it helped with social distancing, but it created a lot of other issues in the community and in households with kids only being in school part of the time or not. And so I think at the end of that, we felt like the My School Online option for those that were concerned about the social distancing and the health aspect gave them a full-on measure of relief for that.
It would, and I understand what you're talking about, although our concern is health and safety, not necessarily economic, although the governor thinks we are in charge of that.
Well,
the other question I had was, I had looked at some European models where the teachers moved to the classrooms rather than the students moving. Did you look at that option at all?
We do, and we talked about that with our principals, and Mr. Chambers can speak to that.
No, I was going to say, and I'm fine. But so we did look at that as well. Once again, working with our work groups comprised of teachers, union reps. So one of the things, especially at the elementary level, a lot of our teachers are math, science. The others are ELA, social studies. Because that was one of the first things that we went to. Let's just lessen the transition. We thought it was a great idea. And then the teachers came back and said, look, all of our materials are in one spot. It'd be very difficult to do that and still do it as effectively. So we did take that input and it made sense.
Well, we do have perhaps backup plan if things get bad enough.
No, absolutely. And if things did get, and none of us want to say it that way,
Of course,
but
I guess I'm a little blunt,
but all measures
we
would
don't
be
have
on
a
the
lot of
table.
Good choices here.
But yes, sir.
And I want to thank you all again. You've made the best choices you could and a lot of choices that are not so great. And we'll have to go forward and see, how it turns out. But I know you all have worked very hard on this.
Thank you, Mr. Desson.
Dr. White.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And certainly in a way echoing what Mr. Destin said, there's no question that the school systems in Florida, and for that matter, the entire nation, have I'm not going to say have been given a mission impossible, but they have at the very least been given a challenging mission. And I think that you've done just about as much as you can do, and I'm certain the folks that I've spoken to in the community have expressed to me that, hey, we're in different times. Nothing that we do anymore is the way that it was. And I know whenever Connie and I or my family, we go out or do something, everything's different. And until this virus is resolved in some fashion, I think that's just kind of the way it's going to be. Things are going to be different. And I've watched the other superintendents on television and their comments, and I know they struggled with the same kinds of issues. And I just am very grateful that the superintendent and his staff and our faculties all over the school district and our employees are doing the best they can in this very, very challenging time. So thank you, Superintendent. And with that, Mr. Bryan, I'll conclude.
Thank you, Dr. White. Dr. Kelly?
I would just echo a lot of those sentiments, and understanding that we are working with moving parts. I think we're all doing the best that we can, and I look forward to hearing and reading the reopening plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Ms. Ivanchek?
Yeah, I just, same thing. It's very comprehensive. I think you've covered everything as best you can at this point. Like the superintendent said at the beginning, it may be different tomorrow, but we just have to go with what we know. I do have a question. I'm sure that this is happening, but some of these items where there's cleaning and employees that don't typically have to clean as part of their job, are we working with OCEA on all this to make sure everybody's okay with everything?
Go ahead, Mr. Chambers. Dr. Hale?
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Ivanchek. Thank you for the question. I can tell you that I have been in close contact with both OCEA and OESP. They have both been very, very helpful as we continue to create some of these plans. Both groups have been a part of all the work groups that some of these decisions have been made from, and so there's been union representation involved in the decision making for a lot of this, but the relationship that we have with the unions right now is very, very much a partnership, as we understand that we're in different times, and so things that are outside the job descriptions are going to be less difficult to manage as we have these understandings with both the ed support and the teachers group. In fact, I have another meeting with them in just it's about an hour now, and so we're going to continue to talk through some of these things, but just so that you know, the general understanding is out there with both us and both union groups that this is different. We're going to have to put aside some of those things in partnership in getting through, whether it be cleaning, whether it be adjusting work schedules beyond what the contract maybe would typically call for. A lot of those types of things that are an accommodation for the situation, we are talking through, and we have a gentleman's agreement with both of the unions we're going to figure this out together, and so they've been very helpful to that regard, specifically with regard to the question that you asked.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hill. I appreciate that.
All right.
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right. And I would just echo what my fellow school board members have said, Mr. Chambers and your staff, and to everybody within the Okaloosa County School District. An amazing job of getting us through to the point we are now. At least now we have something out there to give some direction to our parents and to guardians and whoever else this would pertain to. And like you said, it's going to change between now and August 11th, but at least now everybody has a direction. They see what direction we're going. So I appreciate you and everybody within the Okaloosa County School District for all that they're doing.
Thank you.
So let's move on down. Believe it or not, we're still in the workshop part of this meeting, and we do have Section 16, public comment. Members of the public desiring to address the school board. This is the final public comment of our school board meeting. It's 2 minutes per participant. And then we also will have public hearing on Monday night. So 17.1, public hearing for adoption of the Elementary and Secondary Code of Student Conduct for the 2020-2021 school year. And 17.2, public hearing for adoption of new school board policy 01-28, religious expression. All right, so with that being said, this meeting is adjourned, and we are going to go into the workshop part of it, reconvene that. Yes, and now I'm going to actually put that into recess for about a 10-minute break because we do have to make some adjustments. So we are in recess.